For the first 30 minutes or so, our attorney George is going to start a work training session for the board and the public.
All right. As Jordan said, my name is George. Represent the zoning board here, city attorney. So we're going to have a quick presentation for the board and for the public today on the new local law that was adopted by the city council and is effective January 1st, 2024, concerning all electric buildings. The inspiration for the law, it was a state thing. New York adopted the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA. Everyone loves acronyms in law. On July 18th, 2019. New Yorkers approved then the Green Amendment subsequent to that on November 1st, 2021. And then subsequent to that, the New York State Climate Action Council adopted a final scoping plan that was December 19th, 2022. And that's to advance New York's national leading climate goals established by the aforementioned CLCPA. So, in New York State, the pending all-electric proposals, you have first the governor's budget proposal. That calls for the installation of fossil fuel equipment and building systems in any new single-family residential building of any height or any new multifamily residential building not more than 3 stories in height. That shall be prohibited on or after December 31st, 2025. So we're still a couple years away from that, but that's something to keep on the radar. The installation of fossil fuel equipment and building systems in any new multifamily residential building more than 3 stories in height or new commercial buildings shall be prohibited on or after December 31st, 2028. So for multifamily residential more than 3 stories or for commercial, so typically larger projects, they're giving them a little extra time. That's 2028. But for single-family residential or multifamily residential buildings less than 3 stories, that's prohibited on or after December 31st, 2025.
So you said new. What about enhanced via building permit?
In retrospect, I don't believe the state has any intention to actually require people to go back and change anything, but when you have new construction, that's when you can then put in requirements to be fossil fuel free and clean energy and green.
Doesn't the city law stipulate that if you do a renovation past a certain percent?
If it's past a certain percent, that I'm not 100% certain. I know that's
I thought they, if it was over 50 or
different
75,
places, yeah.
The city was going to say you had to then.
Yeah, in that
change.
Situation, it's a question of what crosses the line of renovation, right? If you're renovating, but you're tearing out everything except the exterior walls, is it really a renovation, right? That's going to be probably municipality to municipality specific, and that's a determination for the building inspector if and when that time comes. Yeah, and the zoning board one is before you guys.
Yeah. So the law that the city passed a few months, I think it was more than a few months back now, but the law the city passed was that if somebody was to do 75% renovation or more of the home, and they were also changing out the the heating system in the house, they would have to go all electric at that point. So that's a trigger just for the city of Beacon right now, or at least will be starting the first of the year.
In terms of exemptions from the state budget exemptions, there's any exemptions as a state fire prevention or building code council deem appropriate for the purposes of allowing the installation and use of fossil fuel equipment, where such are installed and used for basically 3 things: for generation of emergency backup power in a manufactured home or in a building or part of a building that is used as there's a list of things here: manufacturing facility, commercial food establishment, laboratory, laundromat, hospital, or other medical facility, or critical infrastructure such as backup power for wastewater treatment facilities or crematoriums, things like that. That's an exemption. And where the exemption is permitted, the exemption shall limit to the full extent feasible the use of fossil fuel equipment and building systems to the system and area of the building for which a prohibition on fossil fuel equipment is infeasible. And it shall also require the area or service within a new building where the fossil fuel equipment is installed to be electrification ready. That's looking forward. And to minimize emissions from the fossil fuel equipment and building systems that are allowed to be used, provided that they don't adversely affect the health, safety, security, fire protection, financial considerations, stuff like that. It's not, a financial consideration is not a sufficient basis to determine infeasibility, right? It's not enough to say that this is going to be too expensive, so it's unfeasible. It really has to do with, is it going to affect the health, safety, security, things like that, these core principles. Now, going to more local, February 6, 2023, the City of Beacon City Council introduced a proposed law to create Chapter 106, Article 5 of the City Code. It's entitled All Electric Buildings. This is to require the electrification of new residential and commercial buildings, and as Elaine referred to and Bruce explained, major renovations. This was adopted March 1st, I believe, 2023, so a couple weeks later. The purpose of the law is to establish a local energy code supplement for all new construction and major renovations. And like I said, it's to really go green. It's to really, embrace that movement. It's to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's to mitigate the effect of global climate change to the extent possible. It's to advance a clean energy economy, to promote the public, and this is what we see a lot, the public health, safety, and general welfare. And also to secure the individual's right to a healthy environment as required under the State Green Amendment. The goal is to eliminate what people call obsolete natural gas infrastructure and associated greenhouse gas emissions in new buildings where all electric infrastructure can be most practically integrated. And this is, again, to reduce the environmental and health hazards produced by transportation of natural gas, consumption of natural gas, and anything related to that. That is effective in the City of Beacon starting January 1st, 2024. That's in the local law. Just an FYI, I don't believe E-Codes has been updated yet. I looked at E-Codes. This isn't on E-Codes yet, but it should be shortly coming. The local law is always available. It probably is available on the city's website somewhere, but you could always ask a city clerk or
So it's December 2024? I thought you said earlier 2025.
Though the 2025 was for the state, but in the City of Beacon, it's January 1st, 2024 that it's effective. So, and you'll see why that's relevant to the zoning board in a couple slides, but right now, again, that's for new buildings and major renovations. That's not, I don't think the goal anywhere is to go retroactively and say, well, you have a gas stove, change that out for no reason other than you have a gas stove. But, the authority for this is under New York State Energy Law, Section 11-109. It's, and subject to the requirements of that section, the City of Beacon has the power to promulgate a local energy conservation construction code that is more stringent than the Energy Conservation Construction Code of New York State. So New York State could say you have to do X, Y, and Z. City of Beacon or any municipality could say you have to do X, Y, Z plus A, B, C, D. That's well within their right. The city also has the authority to enact the law based upon Article 1, Section 19 of the state constitution, which guarantees each person's, quote, right to clean air and water and a healthful environment. And we see more and more throughout the country these movements to go green, to clean the environment, have cleaner air, cleaner water, things like that. The City of Beacon is not alone, however. Some anecdotes. In December 2021, New York City Council passed legislation to phase fossil fuels out of new construction starting in 2024. This law means that new buildings, with few exceptions, will be all electric and emit less carbon, all while improving local air quality and making occupants more comfortable. It places an effective ban on fossil fuel systems in new buildings and renovated ones, pushing to make all new buildings completely electric. And this affects everything from how the building is heated to the kind of stoves that will be in apartments, right? I think generally when we think gas versus electric, it's probably HVAC systems, heat, for example, and stoves. That's really what it comes down to. Dryers too, clothing dryers, that's another big one.
Water heaters.
Water heaters as well, yeah. So there's really these key things that everyone thinks of, and places are trying to get out ahead of that and require you to go greener, with whatever side effects that has, whether it's added cost or less efficiency, more efficiency, whatever it is. That's really the desire behind these laws. In New York City, the requirements will be phased in. For example, new quote-unquote low-rise buildings will be required to be electric by 2024, schools by 2025, and larger buildings by 2027. In New York City, the law covers almost all new construction and renovations, with the exception of, again, some manufacturing, hospitals, and restaurants, right? There's certain, obviously, carve-outs for this requirement with the intention that places like hospitals that we see a lot, or manufacturing facilities, might not be feasible, again, for the health, safety, welfare of the community, not necessarily for the economic reasons. Another example is the town and city of Ithaca. They also adopted a similar legislation. There, effective January 1st, 2026, all buildings must be built to have net zero greenhouse gas emissions, and they shall not use fossil fuels for space heating, water heating, or clothes drying, right? Those are some of the things we just mentioned. It also requires that all new buildings constructed in such a way to produce 40% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than New York State code requires, and it requires that new construction be net zero by 2030. This is an overlay to the state energy code, which includes its own efficiency requirements, including lighting, ventilation, other requirements. So that's, again, an example of you have the state overarching goal, but you also have the ability as a municipality to be more stringent, and the city of Ithaca is showing that. Now, being specific to City of Beacon, the law applies to new residential construction, new commercial construction, and major renovations. What it does not apply to is systems for emergency backup power, because if you're out of electricity and your emergency backup is electric-based, you don't have emergency backup. You're out of luck.
Well, once the batteries go dead.
Yeah, once the batteries go dead. So, manufactured homes, buildings specifically designated for occupancy by, we see it again, manufacturing facility, commercial food establishment, laboratory, laundromat, crematorium, hospital, or other medical facility, municipal water and sewer facilities, or any project that receives site plan approval from the planning board prior to June 30th, 2023. We're past that. Today is August 15th, 2023, but we are past that. Major renovations, what is that? A major renovation under the new law is defined as any construction or renovation to an existing structure other than a repair or addition where the work area exceeds, as Bruce said before, 75% of the heated floor area and involves the replacement or new installation of a heating or hot water system. Think a boiler, think a furnace, or other major system of that sort. Changes to ventilation and air conditioning systems are not considered renovations of the heating system. Another thing that stands out on this slide is the exception for any project that receives site plan approval. The purpose of that planning board exemption is to address situations where projects might undergo phased-in development. So that's sort of what the rationale behind that is. But again, being that it's August 15th and we're having this presentation, there's a good chance that however many handful of projects are approved, but going forward now, site plan approval received from today forward, that exemption does not apply. The article also provides requirements and standards are in addition to and supplement the requirements and standards set forth in the Energy Code and in Chapter 119, which is Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code of our city code. If a requirement of this article is less stringent than that of the Energy Code in effect at the time of application for a building permit, then the more stringent Energy Code requirement shall take precedence. So if you have Energy Code requirement and you have this section requirement, you go with the more stringent one at the time of the building application permit. The city shall enforce this article in addition to the city's enforcement of the Energy Code. Chapter 119, which is the Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code, sets forth the method for administration and enforcement of this article, and it establishes powers, duties, and responsibilities in connection therewith, including penalties and other violations and other remedies for violations of this article. Where an exemption is permitted, the exemption shall limit or require to the fullest extent as determined in the sole discretion of the building inspector to limit the use of fossil fuel equipment and building systems to the system and area of the building for which the prohibition is infeasible, and it shall require the area or service within a new building where fossil fuel equipment and building systems are installed be all electric ready. Again, we saw that from the state, we're seeing that in the city as well. You want to be all electric ready. Again, you're always forward thinking. This is the new wave, the new movement kind of deal.
So by all electric ready, you mean you could swap out whatever old systems
And bring in
and bring in something new
that, yeah.
that's
When it
green?
fails or
Yeah.
But the wiring in the building should work and so on.
As far as I understand, yeah, Bruce is going to be the,
He's the arbiter.
I'm not a wires kind of guy. I do the,
So, yeah, that would be the intent, it would be, all electric ready. Actually, there's currently provisions today for some things to be, newer homes to be ready for solar systems. So, the city adopted the stretch energy code. So there are provisions within the electrical requirements there that they have to, put in wiring and get ready to put in a car charger, as well as, putting in at least the conduits for the solar system, that may possibly come up in the future. This law would be, something very similar. So if they were to put in, I guess, a fossil fuel, furnace, they would have to have provisions or at least have enough power within the building, with a proper breaker in the box in order to run a heat pump, for some, at that point in time when they switch over.
moving on to the next slide. Again, this is that date that I said before, January 1st, 2024. Effective that date, no building permit application shall be accepted by the building department, and no building permit shall be issued for new construction or of major renovations to residential, commercial, or mixed-use buildings which requires the use of fossil fuels to power any equipment or building systems therein, such as space heating, water heating, cooking, clothes drying. Again, the main things that we think of and that we mentioned already. Also on that same day, January 1st, 2024, any heating or hot water system, such as a boiler, furnace, or other major system, repaired or installed any time after the issuance of a building permit to construct or renovate an existing structure involving 75% or more of the heated floor area, other than a repair or addition, shall be electric. We discussed that, but those are some things to keep in mind. And the important thing is January 1st, 2024, right? So that's in 4 months or so, right? So it is coming up. This is a reality, so to speak. It'll be here before we know it. All plans submitted in connection with any application for new construction, subject to the provisions of the article, must include notes and drawings to show the removal of petroleum tanks and demonstrate that any tank removed was appropriately closed in accordance with state regulations, right? So it's not only, let's see electric, we don't really care about what happens. You also have to have a plan to remove everything safely, because again, it's not a matter of my building is electric going forward, great. It's what about the things that came out of it, right?
Oil tanks.
Yeah, we're looking to protect the environment. We don't want these spills. We don't want any big issues like that. Also, the plans submitted in connection with new construction shall have to have notes and drawings to show the removal of natural gas infrastructure and demonstrate again that the natural gas was capped. And any appropriate details shall be noted if such natural gas infrastructure is required to support an emergency backup generator, for example, right? So if you are keeping natural gas around, you have to be able to point that either we cut it off here or it's around, but it's for this limited purpose, right? Again, this is very forward thinking. You don't want to leave a stone unturned. You don't want it to be the fact that cut it off, you don't have to know what I'm doing. You don't have to worry. There's no more gas going to this building. It's a matter of we want to make sure everything's done properly. Everything has to be pointed out. Where relevant to the ZBA is a hardship exemption, right? So any applicant whose building permit application has been denied may apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals for the hardship exemption. This is in an effort to obtain relief from the all-electric buildings requirement. To obtain the certificate of hardship, the applicant must prove the existence of a hardship by establishing that compliance with this article is financially, technically, or physically infeasible. There's 5 points that really, again, apply to the ZBA, and it's in the local law, and just want to go over those quickly so that you guys are aware of it and the public is aware. An applicant whose building permit application has been denied may apply to the ZBA for the hardship exemption. Upon receipt of an application for relief for this hardship exemption, the ZBA shall, within 45 days, hold a public hearing, right? So you get the application to the ZBA, 45 days later, public hearing. Generally, that shouldn't be an issue because we have meetings every month, right? So if you have the application in, you're gonna be within that 30, 31 days. We don't take a month off where then you're rushing to get into that 45-day period. Notice of the public hearing is gonna be the same as every other public hearing, right? You have posting, you have mailing, you have publication, it's gonna be just like that. At the public hearing, the board may hear testimony and entertain the submission of written evidence from the applicant and/or the public. So again, it's similar to what we do every month here. Public gets to speak, the applicant gets to speak. You guys have questions, you ask about it. Now, to obtain the certificate of hardship, the applicant has to prove that there is a hardship. And by doing that, you're establishing that if you were to comply with the requirements of the article, which may be stringent, too stringent for some people, you have to show it's financially, technically, or physically infeasible. Particular examples of what those are, I mean, you could think of plenty, and that's what we're going to see if and when applications for this exemption come before the board.
A non-self-created hardship.
What happened?
Has to be self-created.
Yeah, it has to be non-self-created, and it has to be either I physically cannot do this. Is this going to cost me $20 million to make this building all electric, or there's just there's no power here, or there's not enough power, whatever the case is. Thereafter, the ZBA has to make a decision within 30 days of the conclusion of the hearing. Board's decision shall be in writing, shall state the reasons for granting or denying the application. So again, very similar to what we do here every month anyway. Notwithstanding this general hardship exemption, all new construction and major renovations shall be required to be all electric ready, right? So again, maybe you can't be all electric right now, but be all electric ready for if something changes in a few years, you don't have to now tear down the whole building and go all electric. You have to show that you are ready to receive or to take that step forward, have the clean energy under the city code and under the state regulations. That's the relevance to the ZBA, that's the relevance to the public who, if they are applying for an exemption, will be before the ZBA. That was a super quick overview. Again, this isn't on E-codes right now, but I'm sure it's somewhere on the website, or you could always request it from the city clerk or whatever the case is. You could always search it online under the New York State documents as well. It should be on E-codes shortly, I would imagine. I'm not sure how often E-codes is updated, but it's on there. It will be on there. We've gone over it really quickly. There's a lot of details there. There's a lot of definitions there. But for our purposes, it was a very general overview. Are there any questions on this from the public or from the board here?
I just have one question. What would be a self-created hardship? Can you think of something?
Well, if you bought something assuming you would get a hardship exception, came to us, you bought it, you knew it, to me, that's self-created.
Yeah, and that's something that, it's not like an area variance, for example, or use variance where we have state mandated requirements or considerations to take, factors to take into consideration. But when hearing an application for this hardship exemption, and you're asking, why is this infeasible? It's up to you guys to determine, okay, well, did you, for example, like Monto said, yeah, and maybe there's better examples, I don't know, but did you buy the property assuming that you could come to the ZBA and this was going to be rubber stamped, for example?
Right.
Maybe that's not persuasive enough. As opposed to, I bought the property, it's located somewhere where there's just not enough power to supply to the building right now, right? So those are some different things, and as you probably know from the variances, applications that we get and everything, properties are always unique, right? It's always a case-by-case basis. There's no two properties the same. There's no two cases the same. So it's probably going to be the same thing with the hardship exemption. No two properties the same. No two applications the same. No two rationales are the same. But that's where you hear, you ask the questions, the applicant submits, their application, the public has their say, and we take it case by case. All right? That is it for the hardship exemption, the all-electric building code presentation. With that being said, I think now we will move on to our regular business. This was the first training session we've had in quite some time since Drew left, so I will try to incorporate these going forward as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. And I'll just intro the meeting as normal. Good evening. Welcome to the August 15th, 2023 meeting of the City of Beacon Zoning Board of Appeals. My name is Jordan Haugen. I'm the chairman of this board. Joining us tonight are my fellow board members and also our staff and consultants, including the city building inspector, Bruce, city attorney, who we just heard from, George, and the new zoning secretary, Mercedes. Thank you for joining us. The application materials that will be discussed tonight, including any proposed resolutions and other documents, will be available on the city's website. Also on the city's website is a link to the rules and procedures of the Zoning Board of Appeals. I want to take a minute to explain the board's procedures. First, we'll hear each application, not in the order that it's noticed on the agenda. I'm going to explain that later. For each application, we will hear from the applicant first, and then the board will open the floor to the comments from the public. If you wish to comment, please step up to the podium when called upon. Clearly state your name and address for the record, and all comments should be directed towards the board, not the applicant or city staff. Please limit your comments on a night like tonight when there's many people here for no more than 3 minutes. All email and other written correspondence that has been sent to the zoning board secretary will be made part of the official record for the application. The Zoning Board of Appeals hears and determines appeals from administrative decisions, petitions for variances, and such other matters as may be required by the City Council or the laws of the State of New York. A variance is permission granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals so that a property may be used in a manner not allowed by local zoning code. Variances provide flexibility in the application of the zoning law and afford the landowner an opportunity to apply for administrative relief from certain provisions of the law. The zoning board is limited to grant the minimum variance necessary that addresses the need for the variance while preserving the character, health, safety, and welfare of the community. Our final decisions on any variance application must be based on the evaluation of the application's statutory factors as set forth in the general city law and city code. And those factors, and this is important as both types of variances will be heard tonight. So these are the factors that will be helpful to speak to when making public comment. And for an area variance, these are 5 factors that we have to balance. Will an undesirable change be produced in the character of the neighborhood, or a detriment to nearby properties be created by the granting of an area variance? Will the proposed action compromise the character of the neighborhood? Can the benefit sought by the applicant be achieved by some other method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than the area variance? For example, can a proposed addition be constructed in a different location of the property where a variance would not be needed? 3, is the requested area variance substantial? Will the proposed variance have an adverse impact or effect on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district? And finally, 5, is an alleged difficulty self-created? And then for a use variance, which are rare, but all 4 of these factors must be met for a use variance. Can the owner not realize that the owner cannot realize a reasonable return on the property is zoned? The hardship must be unique to the owner's property and not applicable to a substantial portion of the zoning district. No alteration to the essential character of the neighborhood. Granting the variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. And 4, the hardship is not self-created. Every decision must also be supported by evidence in the record. Thank you for listening to me. And then just as some miscellaneous business, before our actual miscellaneous business, George is just going to introduce an agreement that we are going to vote on.
And we could do that now, Jordan, or we could do it as 9:25
Sure.
comes up, whatever you
Let's
want.
do it that way.
Yeah.
We are going to hear the miscellaneous business first on the agenda, which is to consider a request for a 2-year extension of the area variance at 22 Edgewater Place, submitted by Scenic Beacon Development LLC. This is not a public hearing. Yeah, you are still the applicant. Hello, welcome.
Hello, we are still the applicant. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Taylor Palmer with the law firm of Cuddy and Fader on behalf of the applicant. As the chairman just stated, we are before you in connection with a request for a 2-year extension. We did put a letter to you sort of trying to come to terms with what substantial completion is. That will be for a separate discussion with the building inspector on a future date. But in the meantime, as some of the board may recall, and for the benefit of new members and new council, the Edgewater project involved the demolition of 2 buildings and the construction of 7 new buildings containing 246 apartments. That was including 25 workforce housing units on the 12-acre property. During the entitlement process several years ago, the applicant did receive variance relief from this board, and then also got a special permit from the city council and planning board approvals for site plan and subdivision or lot merger in that case. The variants were conditioned on the applicant, well, on many conditions, one of which, and the only remaining condition of which, was substantial completion of the project within 5 years of the last land use approval. That term was hard to sort of discuss with the board at the time. It was trying to sort of put something together for the largest project that had been approved in the city without real precedent to kind of lay out why we would do that, especially as it took several years to get a building permit, so they couldn't even build the project. The relevant approval that we're faced with, which is the last approval, was the planning board's approval, and that was issued on September 11th of 2018. There have been no project changes since that time, and there are no changes currently proposed. As the board may be aware if you've driven by or seen the site, the Edgewater project is currently under development, and that's been pursuant to the building permit literally issued in 2022. So to give context, the applicant worked with the city for years to coordinate the sewer agreements with the county health department. There was a whole sewer upgrade. It was quite a process before even a building permit could be issued, and that's not even considering the COVID-19 pandemic that happened to be right thereafter as well. So it did take a long time to put those things together. Ultimately, a permit was there. Just for benefit of those, it's provided in our letter, but the applicant has been working diligently since the issuance of those permits to construct the project itself. At this time, the first 3 buildings are approximately 60% complete on the site, and the applicant expects those buildings will be fully constructed by next March. And then the remaining 4 buildings are expected to be completed by June of 2026. So because of the items I mentioned, delays enabling to get to that permit, I think now that the language of the resolutions actually speaks to the issuance of a building permit for this exact or a similarly situated project. Those are the requests we have, and we're requesting a 2-year extension in light of the fact that those buildings, when we determine what substantial completion is, we may not be back before you again, assuming what we can determine. Does that mean 3 buildings, 5 buildings? But that's a separate discussion to have with the building inspector.
Yeah, so to that extent, I just want to, and Mr. Palmer explained it well, the substantial completion question that showed up in the letter, that's a question for Bruce, the building inspector, so that's why Mr. Palmer and Bruce can have the discussion offline after the fact in terms of substantial completion. Bruce has come to the conclusion that it's not substantially completed, so that's why Mr. Palmer is here today asking for an extension request, and you're more than welcome to ask any questions, but any questions as to whether it's substantially completed, that's Bruce's sort of domain.
I have no questions.
Have any of the other 4 buildings been even started as yet? Foundations, anything?
There is some, the grading, some of the grading work, a lot of the sort of the layout of the site has to come together before any of the buildings could be put together. So the answer is yes in so many words, but the actual building construction has not begun. They have to do those in phases, so where they can put material, vehicles, construction equipment, they do them in a process.
What was the initial plan as far as timeline prior to COVID impacting us?
We had suggested between 5 and 7 years to get the whole project completed, and then again, building permit wasn't issued until 2022. So that would still be in line with the development program, and again, we're getting materials, pulling it together, all of it. It's a substantial project, as I'm
5
sure.
to 7 years from the issuance of a building permit, you were saying, or?
We gave a general timeline as far as building out the project. And we actually noted to the board at the time it was issued that this wouldn't have been a sufficient time, and we were told 5 years ago that we will see you for an extension at that time, if that's the case. So we are here.
Well, the last time you were before us was in September of 2020,
Correct.
where we gave you a 2-year extension.
Yes, there are multiple extensions. There were other conditions that had to be satisfied, including the issue. So the way that that resolution was written, the city councils, for example, required us to have a building permit, submit an application for a building permit within a period of time. The zoning board's approval required that we have a building permit issued within a certain period of time. So we got an extension from those provisions, other conditions that were required, and that had been satisfied. So we have an issued building permit within the time frame that the board provided for that extension. We are now seeking an extension of the last remaining condition, which is that the project be substantially complete. The applicant's perspective is it is, but of course that's not his, the realm of the building inspector. So here we are. The last approval was the planning board's approval. In most of the documents you'll see going forward, typically it's the issuance of a building permit rather than the final approval, because just by having a planning board approval, you can't go build the project. It could take a substantial amount of time to get the entitlements or satisfy conditions of an approval.
And that's why our language changed. We used to approve things this way, and then, if you remember, Drew changed how we approved things when in conjunction with other boards, planning board and the city council, at some point because of this project. And so now, in theory, they're all linked up together and not on different approval schedules.
That's correct. The language actually conflicted almost directly with the city councils, so now it lines up directly with when they would have an extension.
Sure. Any other questions? I have a motion.
Motion to grant a 2-year extension on the area variance.
Motion by Montos. Can I have a second?
Seconded.
Second. And I will call the roll. Montos.
Hey, yay, yes.
Yes.
Elaine.
Yes.
Judy.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. And myself, I as well. Thank you.
Great. Well, hopefully we won't see you again on that specific application. We'll speak to Bruce on the next
We'll
one.
see.
I hope not either.
We'll see about that.
We are going to hear these out of order tonight. I know the majority of public is probably here for number one. The board briefly spoke, and we would like to get the easier applications done with so they don't have to sit through this as much as everyone else, unfortunately. So I will accept a motion to open the public hearing on agenda item number 3.
So moved.
Doesn't matter.
Judy, and then second by Elaine. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aria.
Hey, good
Welcome.
evening. Just give me a second.
Just to be clear, this is 359 Cherry Street.
Yeah. I'll get started before the graphics come up. So here with Eva Garcia, the applicant, and I'll introduce the application, and then she wanted to let you know a few reasons for the proposed addition. So the property is an existing single-family residence at 359 Cherry. The owner wants to add to the existing house to create additional living space. And there's an existing deck that would be enclosed, and that would have an additional story on top of that. And then there's a one-story bedroom adjacent to that. The house is existing. It was there before the zoning, so there's already a non-conforming side setback. And then there's a driveway to the right of the house, so it wouldn't be possible to extend the house that way. So we need a couple variances to be able to do that side yard and a rear yard. So, Eva, did you want to?
Good evening, members of the board. Thank you for having me. My name is Eva Garcia, and I live in 359 Cherry Street. I love my house, my neighborhood, my neighbors, and the community. When I bought the house in 2016, my long-term vision was to move to Beacon full-time as soon as my daughter, in high school at the time, went off to college. COVID accelerated this process for me, and Beacon is my permanent home since 2020. We were lucky to be able to leave New York City and find shelter in Beacon during those trying times, and there is no going back. So I now call Beacon my home. The reason I'm planning to put this addition to the house is because in the past years I have developed a chronic Achilles tendinitis and joint pain that makes it hard for me to handle the stairs. Currently, all bedrooms and the only bathroom in the house are on the second floor. I see this house as my retirement home and would like to have a bedroom and a bathroom in the first floor in case my condition worsens as I grow older, or to have more independence if in the future my family needs to move back with me. This is the main reason we're applying now for this addition to the house that we're putting forward for your consideration today. Thank you.
I have that up there now.
Aria, do you have a layout of what's there currently, overhead?
Yeah, so if you look at the survey drawing, that's what's there. The deck that would be removed is shown on there. And the deck would be removed, and then the new foundation for the addition would go in that same outline.
So the addition in the house is replacing, in a sense, the footprint of the deck.
Right, plus the bedroom that's just to the left of
A little bit on
that.
the side,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
So the thing that's replaced in the deck is 2-story, and the other portion of it is 1-story.
Right, right. I've got a question. I don't understand this layout. What's this big empty space right next to the house? Is that another lot?
That's part of the property, but that's there's nothing developed on there.
It's weird.
Yeah.
What's at the end of the driveway? It looks like doors you have at the end of the block.
Oh, there's a fence and some gates there.
Oh, that's a fence gate.
Yeah.
So the garage is not used as a garage?
No, it's yeah. The paving doesn't extend to there. It's just it's an old garage building.
Let's see, but all this property.
But the proposed one-story addition, there's nothing there now, right?
Right.
Too bad we don't know what's on.
So can I start asking questions about alternative?
Please do.
So why would you take that approach and request a 1.2 side yard and not grow it to the right, where you have significant room?
I mean, it's basically there's the driveway there. It starts to get into the area where between the driveway and the garage. It just for the way that the house works
Which
and
isn't used today, right? Because you have that fence there.
right. But yeah, I mean, if you look at the floor plan, the way the house is put together, there's more view that way. It just seemed like it worked better for the plan to have it on the other side.
And on that side, there's another residence, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Just curious, what's the side yard on that residence? How far away is it?
I don't know where the house is in relation to that. I didn't have that on the survey.
Sorry, Ari, I'm just going to read one letter that was written in public comment, and you can choose to respond to the concerns of this letter or not. This was written to us. I am writing on behalf of myself, Elizabeth. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the last name, and her partner Alfred. They live at 355 Tioronda Avenue, which abuts the rear line of 359 Cherry Street. They're aware of the application. They have the following concerns. The proposed additions will create substantial additional impervious surface area. How will the stormwater runoff be handled so it's not directed onto 335 Tioronda Avenue? We are downhill from 359 Cherry Street. There is a drain pipe that extends out of the concrete retaining wall with an elbow on it, so stormwater runoff is directed towards 335 Tioronda. That pipe is approximately 6 feet from the property line. We request that this drain pipe be redirected and the stormwater runoff from 359 Cherry Street is not directed into 335 Tioronda Avenue. We request that the site plan show a stormwater drainage plan that will stop stormwater from 359 Cherry Street flowing into 335 Tioronda Avenue. Upon our above noted concern being addressed and corrected, they will be in support of the project. I guess with that being said, have there been any consideration towards runoff or slopes at all on this project?
We didn't get into like the site engineering on this because we're really here for the for the area variances.
Sure.
But we would in the course of putting the building permit drawings together have to look at the drainage and how that affects the site. So those concerns would be addressed.
If you flipped, what would be the issue with flipping the bedroom to the...
Elaine, could you speak?
We can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Bring your microphone.
What would be the issue with flipping the bedroom from the left side to the right side? It looks like there's enough room. It's past the driveway.
Yeah, and one part of that is there's that existing Bilco door there. That's the entrance, the only way to the basement, and that would interfere with that.
You can't move that?
It's tough. I mean, there would be a lot of foundation work to do. I'm not. Also, I think on the other side it's not full basement, right? Yeah, there's not access to the full basement on the other side. Yeah, it's crawl space. A lot of the
If you
what's below
pushed
there
it
is
back a
crawl
little
space.
bit, you could switch the sides, pushed it back, you'd still have access to the basement.
That's something to.
I'm not the architect. When we looked into this before, it seems to be really difficult because the other side of the house it's crawl space or it's solid ground, so there is no basement. And on the side of the house that you're proposing, it's the egress, it's the access to the basement. So
Yeah,
not
but
sure
if-
how we can move that.
It makes it suggesting possibly back there, so there's still access there. To the other side.
You mean here? Right, but then, we need room here to get.
Elaine, to clarify, is your
the
question
entrance is
about
this way.
the one-story addition basically being straight off the back, almost where the,
What
No.
we're saying is
And then,
one-story
the garage is
addition to the
here,
right.
and sometimes
To
it's
the
usable.
right.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, those
It doesn't look
gates
like
can
there's
actually
even-
be open to the width of a car to get into the garage.
So that Bilco door is one thing. Also, Eva was just telling me that she does sometimes use that garage, that those gates open and she can get through there. So that would block that.
Oh, because there's no paving back past that.
Yeah, I mean, she drives over the grass if she needs to get in there, but she uses that at some points.
Because when I looked at it, it looked like it was all garden past the gate.
That was a driveway. That was originally a driveway. And then when I repaved my current driveway, I left that space with gravel for the time being because the garage is not in a very good condition. The foundation needs to be reappointed. So right now, it's not a very good idea to put the heavy weight of a car inside of that garage, but I would like to retain that right in the future if I manage to fix it.
I think sometimes when you're asking for something, it might be wise to also be willing to give something. With that proverb, as I asked you once recently, would you like us to vote on this evening, or would you like to have an opportunity to potentially alter and/or propose a stronger argument for why this particular variance, specifically the 1.2 setback, is needed?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, based on what we were saying with the, it wouldn't be possible just to flip it over to the other side, you know, that bedroom, just because of the basement access and the access to the garage when that.
But it would be possible to extend back. Towards the rear.
Not do the side and just go back
Correct.
further? Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility.
And then you could stay within the existing and not ask for additional relief from more than what you have today.
Right. Yeah, let me.
If they want us to go forward. While they discuss, anyone from the public want to comment on this? Sure, if you could approach, state your name and address for the record, please.
My name is Alfred Esposito, 335 Tyrone.
Could you
I'm
tip
sorry.
the microphone towards you?
Sure. Alfred Esposito, 335 Tyrone Avenue. We, and
letter
with
right,
Elizabeth, about the rear yard. Our concerns that we wrote about are with the water. Obviously, we'd like that taken care of. But in the light of full transparency, which I don't think is being presented this evening, the property is operated as an Airbnb. We fear that the extensions will be used for that. The side yard that nobody wants to talk about should show on the site plan that a septic exists there. There's no speaking of upgrading that to facilitate this either. So just wanted to put that out there.
Bruce, is this a registered and/or known violator of the city's Airbnb law?
I have to look it up. I'm not familiar with the address.
Okay.
So I'd have to look it up and just verify if it is a registered short-term rental.
Sure.
I can address that. My Airbnb is registered. I have a permit from the city of Beacon.
Could you just?
Sorry. My Airbnb is registered. I have a permit from the city of Beacon. My house was inspected by Scott.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Anyone else from the public wish to comment on this application?
Who wouldn't want to live in paradise? The applicant's house original footprint is close to the expansion, so I see this going through. And you mentioned it, could they build going back further and not off to the side as much as shown? Kick it in half? As the board mentioned in their concerns, I hope the applicant is willing to work with its neighbors to redirect the stormwater runoff with a guarantee before this moves forward with a vote. Thank you.
Teresa, I know you're a frequent flyer, but could you just state your name for the record?
Teresa Kraft.
Thank you.
And address, Teresa.
And address?
And address, Teresa.
Get your steps in.
Beacon, New York, Liberty Street.
Thank you.
She should know by now.
Anyone else from the public? RA, welcome back. Would you like an adjournment?
Well, let me ask you, if you do vote on it, and for some strange reason you happen to say no, we could come back with a different application. Right?
No.
George, what is the answer to Arya's question?
Yeah, so that's a more complicated situation, because then I believe it has to be a unanimous vote by the board to rehear the application. It's almost like double jeopardy that we see if there was a criminal trial. Obviously, this isn't a criminal trial. There's no one killed anyone here. But to that extent, the safer option is probably to come back, speak with your client, and I'm not advising, I'm not giving legal advice, but speak with your client about whether it is feasible to move it to the back, in which case you eliminate one variance. See if you could satisfy some of the neighbors' concerns. To the extent that maybe you can't, maybe have some better clarity on that for next meeting, if that's the case. But if it is voted on tonight, then it is definitely a harder proposition to come back and present it with changes subsequent to the vote.
Okay. I mean, the only question, it would reduce the severity of that side yard variance, but I think we would still need one because...
Sure, I think, I think any reduction of a requested variance is the objective of this board, right? I think also, maybe speaking, I know it would be later on in the process, but just being able to have some narrative to speak to the neighbors' concerns would be helpful in our decision-making, especially to some of the environmental factors in the factors that we have to consider.
Okay.
And I would add, you have 8 feet now in the existing structure. You'd probably be pretty good if you came back at 8 feet on any proposed as well.
Okay. I mean, I think, since we're using that footprint of the deck, it's actually a little bit more than the 8 feet that we would be asking for, most likely. But yeah, so you're saying that would be sort of the minimum there?
I'm not saying a commitment one way or the other. I'm just saying your existing is 8 feet.
Yeah.
You probably could make a pretty good case.
Okay. Right.
So do we have to take a vote to table it?
No.
To continue it?
I'm just I'm going to ask for a motion.
Okay, yeah, we'll
Sure.
adjourn.
Can I have a motion to adjourn agenda item number 3 to the September already? Wow. September meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals, please?
Motion.
Motion. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion. Judy? Second. Montos. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All ayes.
Thank
you. Yep. Can I have a motion to open the public hearing on agenda item number 2, please?
Motion. Go ahead.
Motion by Montos. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second.
By Stowe.
Stowe. All in favor?
Aye. What happened?
I hear some screwy with this.
Welcome.
Yeah, with this one?
No,
Oh,
this one.
this one?
Doesn't this look familiar? Doesn't this look familiar?
It does. This is the one where they're taking it down, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna demolish.
Okay.
What happened?
Go ahead.
All right, good evening. I'm Steve Whalen of Whalen Architecture, representing the owners of 75 Oak Street. While this is, it's trying to find it, but while the PDFs are coming up online, so we were here a couple months ago, same project. At that time, we were seeking an area variance for a proposed addition on the back of the existing residence. Since then, we've been out to the house a number of times, reviewed the key existing construction, which is really poorly done. So our proposal tonight is to demolish the building and then to reconstruct it in the existing footprint along with the proposed addition along the back but maintain the same height. So we're not going to increase the footprint outside of the addition across the back, but that is triggering a couple of variances because the existing building as it is right now is beyond both the left and right setback lines, or the side yard setback lines. No, this just came up. So this is the existing house as it is right now. So our proposed addition was across the back, which is seen in this photo right here. So our proposal is to, like I said, remove this, rebuild it, but as per our previous, the area variance that we were seeking before, so we're not getting any bigger than what we were seeking before. And we're looking to, so this is a rendering of what we're looking to put back.
So you're asking basically for the same exact area variances, but for a new built building, the other one's going to be.
Exactly. Because the existing
We've
building.
already approved those.
Correct. But the existing building right now is existing non-conforming.
Pre-existing non-conforming, right?
Yep.
Do you have an overhead overlay or an overhead of what exists now versus what's proposed? Like not renderings, but on, survey-ish look?
Yeah.
And while he's pulling that up, to Stowe's point, the previous variances approved were for the rear addition to the house, which are in those plans, it's that shaded area. So if the variances under consideration today are actually sort of higher up on the house, so the previous variance, for example, on that bottom right-hand corner was 3.5 feet side yard setback, or 3.5 feet, yeah, 3.5 feet. Now it's a 3.1. And on the left, that little part of the house that pops out, it's a 5.4 foot, whereas the previous one in June was 8.2 feet because it was just the addition. So it's obviously very similar and easy to understand, but I just want to state that they're not the same exact numbers, and that's because when the applicant came in June, we were focused just on the rear addition. But now that it's being proposed in the same exact footprint, we take the widest aspect and the.
But the footprint of the new is the footprint of what matches.
That's my understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, the footprint that we're going to put back is going to match this.
Got it.
And I talked with the building inspector, excuse me, and at the completion of construction, we will get an as-built survey documenting that, we met this.
Sure.
And to that extent as well, I just want to state that my understanding is there's no front yard variance required under section 223-13.K, which has to deal with conformity with the rest of the neighborhood. So the only variances needed are side yard setbacks, one for the east side and one for the west side. There's no rear yard issue, and the front yard is under that 223-13.K consideration.
One of the items that had come up during our previous presentation, one of the neighbors had spoken up about a tree in the backyard.
Yes.
So we're looking at the foundation. If that foundation has to come out, that tree is going to have to come out. So that will be addressed.
Any other questions from the board for the applicant at this time?
No.
Anyone from the public wish to speak on this agenda item?
Sorry, Teresa Kraft. I'm not opposed to these side yard setbacks, but perhaps this applicant should have completed the formal process through the ZBA before it lists its potential building on Zillow shy of $1 million. The ZBA should have take a hard look at rubber stamping these reliefs for setbacks. Maybe they could have redesigned the house to fit in the allowed footprint.
Thank you.
And to that, we actually did look, but where you have such a narrow footprint right there, to avoid a variance, I mean, all the rooms would have to be like stacked.
That's the dotted line in that drawing, correct?
Correct, yeah,
That would be
that's-
the conforming building.
Yep. Yeah, it'd be a very narrow building.
Yes. All right. Can I have a motion to close the public hearing on agenda item number 2?
Motion.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Motion by Elaine, second by Montos.
Montos.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. We'll go through the factors, which I have somewhere. Okay. All right. So I think we'll take these together as they're substantially the same. As to whether as to whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties will be created by the granting of the area variances, discuss.
No.
Yeah,
It's the same footprint of the existing building.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I think it's an older building. I think it's a good thing to put a new building there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all points. I do not think an undesirable change would be produced.
No, I don't think so either. It's such a narrow lot, I don't know what else you could do.
Yep, I agree with all that. As to whether the benefit the applicant seeks can be achieved through another means feasible to the applicant to pursue that does not require the area variance.
I don't think so. It's like Elaine said, it's such a narrow lot, I don't think there's any other options here.
I mean, unless you put a trailer on it, I don't know what else you could do.
Yeah, the only answer is going underground, so no.
Yeah, I think this is one of those lots that, when zoning came in, it made it pretty much impossible, in the pre-existing non-conforming use.
I concur.
Yeah. As to whether the requested variances are substantial,
No.
I would say no, since it's in the footprint.
Yeah.
No, not substantial.
I think the backyard one is.
yeah, I think, again, mathematically, right, I think that they are. I think the backyard one is more even relative. I don't think it's determinative, however. As to whether the proposed variances will have an adverse effect or impact on the physical or environmental conditions in the neighborhood or district,
No.
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 I agree. And as to whether the alleged difficulty is self-created.
I think this is an example of one that's not self-created.
Wow. We've never seen that before.
What do you say, Jordan?
What's your reasoning, Montos?
It already exists, non-conforming, the lot is narrow.
My retort to that would be they don't have to do what they're doing.
They don't have to.
Could come down, though.
Ergo, it would be self-created in my mind, but you know me.
I think it's self-created.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
No, I don't. I think it's self-created.
All right. And as to whether this is the minimum variance necessary and adequate to preserve and protect the character of the neighborhood and the health, safety, and welfare of the community?
Sure. Yes.
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 I'm nodding,
All
yes.
And then my question to the applicant prior to any action on this item, would there be any problem, number one, paying all fees to the city, and then obtaining a building permit within 6 months and commencing construction, and then, obtaining a building permit within 6 months, commencing construction within 6 months after the obtaining of the building permit, and then completing construction and obtaining a C of O within 2 years after the issuance of the permit.
Yeah, well, all fees will be paid. We're actually going to be bringing drawings into the building department this month and hope to get started next month and be done, or at least weather tight by winter, and be done over the winter.
And then you also mentioned, and you'll accept as a condition, submitting an as-built survey.
That's correct.
Great. And Bruce, would you want anything else? No, nothing else. All right. Can I have a motion?
Motion to grant the variances.
We have a motion to grant the variances by Elaine. Can I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Judy, and then I will call the roll. Stowe?
Yes.
All right. Judy?
Aye.
Montos?
Yes.
And Elaine?
Yes.
Yes, for me as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And just for the record, that also means that obviously the prior variances are revoked because they're no longer necessary. The ones for the rear addition, these now take priority.
Gotcha.
Congratulations.
Okay. Great, thank you.
And now for the main event. Can I have a motion to open or continue the public hearing on agenda item number 1?
So moved?
I have a motion by Judy. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second by Stowe. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Hello, Mr. Palmer.
Good evening, as always, saving the best for last. If I may, Mr. Chairman, for the board, Taylor Palmer with the law firm of Cuddy and Fader on behalf of the applicant. Tonight, I am joined by our financial analysis consultant from Hudson Property Advisors, Bill Forsheimer. He'll correct you and say it correctly when he comes up and presents it. As the chairman mentioned, we are before you in connection with our continued review of our appeal of the interpretations made by the building inspector, in this instance specifically tonight regarding our alternative request for relief, which is for an area variance, and then in the further alternative, a request for a use variance, which we'll discuss for the benefit of the board. By way of background, as tonight is also a public hearing on those two latter requests. The board previously had a public hearing on the interpretations, which was opened and closed at the June 21st zoning board meeting. We then appeared before you in July, at which time this board overturned 2/3 of the building inspector's determinations, which brings us back to you all this evening for continued review. So to that end, our discussion tonight focuses explicitly on 22310C4, notwithstanding the applicant's plain reading of the code that section only applies to non-conforming buildings, but uses. Again, that was related to the determination discussed last month. So in a minute, again, I will have Hudson Property Advisors address their financial analysis as it relates specifically to the use variance factor, has no relation to the area variance factors before you. Turning first then to the area variance request. We did provide very detailed submissions to you laying out all of these factors, so I'm not going to go through the many pages, but I will do my best to summarize, as the chairman previously presented, the factors that are before you for balancing this evening. So thus, the variance that we are speaking about is 2/3 of the determination was overturned at the last month, would be to allow the reconstruction of the, effectively of the building pursuant to the issued building permits, and that would be in lieu of the 50% limitation in the zoning code. So the section of the zoning code, excuse me, I'll pull that section up in just a minute. But the factors that we're discussing with you this evening, just to summarize, concern whether an undesirable change will be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties will be created by granting the area variance. Of course, this building had been existing on the premises well before many of the residents that surround it, as it was also an existing non-conforming use. At least the history we have on it goes back to at least 1965. Of course, it was before that if you look at the historic aerials of the property. There is also the same use directly across the street from it at 916 Walcott Avenue, and there are a number of other multifamily, including the city's affordable housing property right down the street for the Beacon Housing Authority. And of course, this proposal is actually a reduction in the existing nonconformity, and it would reduce it down from 16 units to 9. In our submission, we go through a number of the other nearby adjacent uses, including, as I mentioned, the Beacon Housing Authority and others. That's a general breakdown on the first factor. The next factor is whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some other method feasible to the applicant to pursue, other than the area variance. As we detailed in our March submission, if the area variance is not granted, of course, the applicant, in this instance, short of overturning or bringing it and challenging the building inspector's determination at the Supreme Court, would not be able to rebuild that structure. It would only be allowed to, which our consultant will get into in a minute, the only use in the current zoning would be a single-family home. Of course, that would also put further pressure on Beacon's available housing stock, including that of affordability, and of course, that's in direct contravention of the city's comprehensive plan and objectives. One of the questions, or one of the third factor to consider for you all is whether the requested variance is substantial. Of course, substantiality isn't necessarily just measured based on the percentage deviation. It's a balancing test here. Of course, we respectfully submit that this is not substantial. It's merely a request to rebuild the building that had been on the property before it was burned down in an arson event. And indeed, as I mentioned, we are reducing the existing nonconformity based on the number of units. So if anything, we're bringing it into better conformity with the current zoning. It's also consistent with other nearby development, including, again, across the street at 916 Walcott. The fourth factor is whether the proposed area variance will have an adverse impact on the physical, environmental considerations in the neighborhood and district. This typically gets in sort of the seeker discussion. The granting of this variance in the R110 district will not be of any more intensity of the long-established use that was on this property, again, reducing it from 16 units down to 9. And moreover, this action, as we identified in our submissions, is actually a type 2 action under seeker for rebuilding or reconstructing of a structure of the same kind and facility would be a type 2 action. So it's exempt from the environmental review for the project. The one factor you all were just discussing on the prior application, the fifth factor, is whether the alleged difficulty is self-created, which is a consideration that's relevant to your decision, but doesn't necessarily preclude the granting of an area variance. Now, remember, we're only talking about the area variance. We'll probably, I think we'll maybe go through that, and then how the chair wants to run the discussion. We may shift. I'm pleased to present on both, and then we can go from there, but I'll touch first.
I'm at a loss, honestly. What is the area variance that you're asking for? You've gone through the factors, but what is the actual variance?
Right, so
It's not in this material.
It is, the original submission that we made included the area variance. So the initial request was for interpretations, and there were 3 determinations made by the building inspector. So then the alternative relief was laid out for each of the, meaning if you decided that all 3 of those determinations were upheld, we would then, our alternative relief would be to get an area variance or in the further alternative.
But for an area variance, you have to actually have a request for a variance of some area-related issue. There's nothing here.
So I believe.
It sounds like a use variance description.
So I believe that council will probably address that as we go forward, and that's likely to lead to a further supplemental submission to address that particular issue. And notwithstanding, we still have our pending relief, but I think that's more of a legal question that we're going to have to address in a supplemental submission. I don't know if you want to talk to that now.
To that extent, there is, just for clarity, the submissions so far sort of pile on top of each other. So there was the March 20th, right? You had a May 19th one, and now there's July 25th.
We had May, so it was all the way from March every month through to this month. And then we were going to submit a letter today, but understanding that we're effectively going to present your comments and this potential legal issue, there will be one more on top of that.
And so to that extent, sorry to cut you off, Jordan, to that extent, there is a question that we have to do some further research into about area variance versus use variance. The area variance, and Mr. Palmer, correct me if I'm wrong, is from section 223 is it 13D, or 10D or 13D?
It's the building inspector upheld, and maybe Bruce can weigh in on just looking at statutory prescription.
Yeah.
It was the first interpretation. Here, I can go back to our notes from the first submission.
And I have it here, but it is the section for
10D?
Cannot be rebuilt except, if it's been damaged more than 50%. It was
Right.
the one section, as Mr. Palmer said, that was upheld in the interpretation question. So the area variance would be from that section.
We're effectively saying that 50%, so the critical the threshold variance issue is that if it's more than 50%, then, so we're numerically, we're asking effectively for 100%, we're seeking a 50% relief to allow them to, the building inspector made a determination that we don't agree with. We believe that if a use ceases for more than a year, in that instance, then the use is gone. But the building inspector has made a specific determination that as soon as more than 50% of the building is gone, the use is gone.
To be clear, we made the determination, correct?
Correct. The building inspector made the determination, you upheld the determination. So you didn't make the determination for the building. You upheld the building inspector's
So
determination.
that's currently our
So the position is,
Stands.
exactly right. So what we're doing and what I guess maybe we should have started with the tolling agreement.
Yeah, and I'll get into that.
It's all coming there.
Yeah.
Comes around, comes around.
Yeah.
Again, the best for last. So what we're proposing in this instance, now that the zoning board has upheld the building inspector's determination on that issue, we're seeking numerically, we're seeking a 50% variance to allow the building to be reconstructed. So it says that the use is no longer permissive. You know, again, that's the building inspector's determination that we disagree with. So we're asking the board to vary that standard to allow 100% destruction to allow the building to be reconstructed. That's the area variance that's being sought.
And there is
Well, why is that an area variance?
Well, so that's the question that requires some legal research, and to that extent, tonight, Mr. Palmer is prepared to present both the justification for an area variance and a use variance.
Right.
I think it might be cleaner to go one at a time instead of merging them. For next
Just the
meeting is
factors.
when our office will be able to look into it further and say, okay, we looked into it, it's actually a use variance. If you'd like to speak more on the use variance next meeting, tell us, supplemental submission, whatever the case is. But as of right now, we're not 100% certain whether it falls under.
So we're not voting on anything?
no.
Tonight, no, tonight the applicant is going to present on
But
both
there's-
issues.
If you forget the background, all the preamble before this passed, there's no area-related variance being asked for.
Anecdotally, I think I can address that.
You're not saying, I'm supposed to have a 30-foot setback, but I only have 15.
It is, it's a numeric standard. If it was 49%, the issue wouldn't be before your board.
And-
So because we're at 50, it's saying, same as building height, same as number of units, we're seeking to vary the numeric threshold that's driving this consideration. If the use was not permitted, which is not, so that goes into the use variance standard, that's the appropriate consideration. We are again, we disagree, and we have reserved the right through the tolling agreement to effectively appeal that determination. The court could, if the board were not to adopt an approval on an area or a use variance alternative, we would seek relief from all of these, and it would start with that initial determination. Because you've upheld his determination, the alternative relief we're seeking, because of the total uniqueness of this, like when we dial this thing down to what the application before you is, we have a building, it was burned down, the applicant wants to rebuild it, literally pursuant to a building permit that they were actively building out. That's it.
Right.
So we're seeking an area variance
No,
through
that's- that's-
balancing these factors.
That's not quite it. It was a non-conforming use.
Correct.
You left that part out of the simple story.
So for the benefit of the public, it was an existing non-conforming use
Right.
that was destroyed by another intentionally, not intentionally by the property owner, and the applicant is merely trying to, which they invested their money in, rebuild the existing non-conforming use, which our perspective is permissive by the zoning code, if it's done within 1 year. The board didn't address that issue because it upheld the building inspector's determination about the 50% threshold terminating the use. So as a consequence of that determination, we are now specifically appealing, again, based on these 5 factors, weighing the hardship that the applicant's faced, what he can do on that site under the current zoning versus what was approved, literally with a building permit. I mean, that's particularly unique, one that I can't imagine this board has seen. I, in my experience, have not seen it before your board, and that's only talking about 10 years. So it's particularly unique. And that's, so again, that area variance standard is varying that 50% threshold of the damage.
So your argument, look, as I understand it, and this is the part that's hard for me to get, we have now judged that we agreed with our building inspector's interpretation, therefore, we weren't going to let you just move ahead with rebuilding. But you're saying that there's this interpretation of, it's a area variance question because of the percentage of destruction of the building.
We're asking.
The building was 100% destroyed.
Correct. And the code says that if it's more than 50%, our reading of the code says if it's more than 50% destroyed, and this is a plain reading of the code, it said, and I'll read you the section of the code. It says, if any non-conforming building shall be destroyed by any means to an extent of more than 50%, no repairs or reconstruction shall be made unless every portion of the building is made to conform to all the regulations of this chapter for the district in which it is located.
But we did not agree with your interpretation. We're saying that it was 100% destroyed, therefore.
Exactly. So now,
Now you
so,
have to ask for a
so you've made that correct.
Well,
You've,
why an area variance? Why wouldn't it be a use variance?
so the standard, so,
You're asking for 50% relief, is what you're
correct.
saying on that
Yes,
determination.
we're saying that based on all the facts and circumstances, yes, the uniqueness of this section of the code, this is a zoning regulation, so it can be varied. It can't be applied unilaterally, it has to be, that's why this board exists. Unique hardship,
So
all
you're
the,
saying the degree of destruction of the building is a variable that we can pretend.
well,
That's his legal argument.
That,
We can
that's,
offer a
But it's
variance.
not like the number of feet from the back of the house to the end of the lot.
but numerically, it's a numeric, so that's,
Number.
I think
yeah.
you make a great point. Remember, we're going to address this with council in a supplemental, we have to, there's no way around it. Effectively, what we're asking the board to do is balance the factors, assuming we come to a collective on this as a, it's our perspective, and looking at this, it's a numerical threshold, and thus it can be varied. It's in zoning, that's what we're seeking. Looking at the hardship regulations, but you see the here, and let me just anecdotally make a reference here. We believe that this is not something you typically see, because you won't. The uses would have to have ceased for a year. That didn't happen here. So this provision is rubbing up against the reality of what the code regulates. So because we're well within it, one of the matters we'll submit to you in our supplemental submission relates to 52 South Chestnut. You're all familiar with Analex Auto Body, formerly Chevron, now Ed's. That building was destroyed in a snowstorm. It was vacant, or there was no building on that site for several years, and then years later, this board granted it a use variance. That was because the use had ceased not because it was destroyed more than 50%, but because the use, and these are on information and belief, we haven't been provided access to the city's files yet, but again, information and belief from discussions with local residents, reviewing files, looking at foils, everything else. That building was allowed to be rebuilt through a use variance, and that's because it was more than a year when the use ceased. So that's different than what we have. Our applicant, the day that thing was burned, submitted for insurance, and came back, effectively saying, hey, I already have a building permit for this, let me rebuild it. And the building inspector said, because of this provision, you cannot rebuild. We didn't have discussions at that time about the other sections of the code, for example, ceasing as more than 1 year. Practice is practice, but we just read the code plainly. Your board upheld it, so we're sort of in a rock of a place, but the reality of what we're asking you to do is, if we can come to the legal ease understanding of it, the board would be looking at your 5 factors the same way you'd look at a building height or setback or otherwise, and saying, in this instance, where a building is destroyed by somebody else maliciously, where a property owner had the right to use it for what it was, and looking at the 5 factors, balancing it, on the application, that the applicant would receive a 50% relief so as to be able to build the project.
and,
George?
Yes.
I have a question.
yeah.
We decided at the last meeting, we upheld the last, Bruce's last,
Yeah, it's 223.
223.
It's 223-10D.
Right, so we
Point B.
decided that piece of it also applied to use,
Okay.
right? It wasn't merely an area,
Yes, that was the decision.
that was our decision.
Yes.
So if we decide to now look at this as an area variance, doesn't that contradict our last decision?
No,
No?
because, so the first question was if we agree with the interpretation of the code. Now, per his argument, which may or may not be the right argument, he wants to vary the code, so he's asking for relief from the code, not an interpretation of the code.
Promise.
Right? So,
But our decision pertained to use, not area.
Well, the decision on
Correct, it was
the
just-
interpretation basically said, this section of the code applies to both the bulk regulations, which
Right.
Mr. Palmer, you conceded that it applies to the bulk regulations, and we said, the board said, it also applies to use regulations. To that extent, fast forward now, the interpretive question is a thing of the past. Mr. Palmer is not asking for an interpretation on that. The question now becomes, okay, would like a variance from this. When you say I want a variance, you have to characterize it as an area or a use variance. To that extent, Mr. Palmer's position is that it is an area variance because it has a numerical factor, it's 50%. Typically, as you see with area variances, it's easy to say, okay, here's a schedule of bulk regulations, we want an area variance from this. This is why this one's this is unique. This is a unique aspect. So we have to look further into it to confirm whether it is, we can all agree it's a variance. We have to confirm whether it's an area variance or a use variance. To that extent, the best practice, and I think the cleanest way for that to happen, is presentation today on the area variance. You guys could ask your questions, you could agree, disagree, whatever the case may be, but assume that it is possible to be an area variance for the sake of hearing the application, and we either transition straight to the use variance, or we take a 2-minute break, whatever the case is, however we want to move forward, and then we hear the presentation on the use variance.
Why wouldn't you, the lawyers, just get together and decide if it's area variance, and if it's area variance, you bring it to us with the specific numeric that we'd be voting on?
Well, this came up to us today. Yeah, this came to us today at like 4
Why
o'clock.
bring this to us now when it might not even?
We submit that it is, but council brought it to our attention today at 4 o'clock.
What's your numerical value in black and white of what you want us to vote on?
50%.
50%.
50%.
Why isn't that written in here of what we're voting
Well,
on? For the
It is included in the original, the March submission.
Where does the public see that on tonight's agenda? Of what you want us to vote on, to hear and vote on?
Well, you're not voting, again, just to be clear, we're not, the
Yeah.
board is not, I think council is represented this, I'm just speaking for council. No vote is taking place tonight. The public is providing input. We're going to prepare a supplemental submission that addresses this separate, completely legal issue, and we're here to present both of the applications. So all this material, whether the resolution, whether the agenda needs to be updated for next month, however it's appropriate,
So you're
it's all
saying
there.
that in principle, the thing we should do next is proceed to hearing your use variance arguments.
Well, I think if,
So respectfully, to both of you, I think actually what the prudent thing to do would be to hear the use variance application, and if it is determined by council later that it is even possible to hear an area variance on something like this, then we would entertain it at that time. I understand efficiencies may make it more sense for you to present both tonight, but I don't feel like wasting anybody's time, and until we know.
yeah, I think it's important to get the public's input, and we're here tonight for a public hearing. It's going to be continued to next month, so anyone here or not will have that information. It's been clarified on the record tonight with explicit detail, with the relief that we're seeking in twofold, the area variance or in the alternative. It is completely laid out in our applications, all which are posted. This notice provides more than ample detail with respect to the relief that's being sought, which is area or use variances. So explicitly, it does satisfy the code requirements, and we did also notice in accordance with the city's regulations, and we re-noticed based on the requirements of the board. So with that, I will finish the area variance factors. The one we got up to was the alleged difficulty being self-created. This, I think, is a pretty clear instance of it not being a self-created hardship for many reasons. Again, the difference now between an area variance and the use variance is the balancing test.
Yeah.
The area variance is a balancing test, right? No one factor is more dispositive than the other. They're all sort of put into a blender, looking at it from a perspective of how this thing comes out. Again, before the board is really a request to rebuild a building that was there for nearly 100 years for a less non-conforming use than was there, generally more consistent with the area than it had been previously. So that's an area variance balancing test look. In the second alternative, we shift now to a different standard, the use variance standard. And effectively, we're seeking in the alternative to the area variance, a use variance to permit the multifamily use that existed on the property to continue as was approved pursuant to the building permit from 2022, which is number 354. That was to reduce the nonconformity effectively from 16 units down to 9. So, this was a long-established multifamily use that was on this property. Our letters and supplemental submissions provide, again, very heavy detail. We would be here for a long time for me to go through it. For the members of the public, we've gone through extensive details and supplied exhibits, and we'll make one presentation tonight on our financial analysis. That's one of the factors that will be considered here. But all of those, including this report, are available online. So the first factor, as distinguishable from an area variance, is that the applicant cannot realize a reasonable return provided that lack of return is substantial and demonstrated by competent financial evidence, right? So I'll summarize, and then I'll ask my colleague here to go through the report that we presented, and then I'll come back to the other factors, because it'll be too hard to kind of jump around and leave this important condition out. I want to make sure that's in the record with this, and of course, if the board has specific comments to the financial analysis, or should it suggest that it have a consultant review our consultant's report, that way we can proceed from there. So just very briefly, we did submit this was in our original application materials, a zoning feasibility analysis, what I refer to as the fiscal analysis, and that was prepared by Hudson Property Advisors. And that, ultimately goes through what this property was purchased, how it was being used, and effectively what could be generated therewith. So while the total number of existing non-conforming units will be reduced from 16 units down to 9, the applicant has a certain expectation of income related to those, to the number of units that were there, and as proposed, and as is presented to you in this application. With that, I think it's probably easiest to have our financial consultant run through his report, and then I can try and sort of express the reality of what this is looking at is, under current zoning, the only thing they could rebuild, if this use was gone for more than a year, in our perspective, if it was gone for more than a year, then you could only build today a single-family house. I think some of the other uses are parks, preserves, community gardens, and places of worship, right? So the analysis is looking at what you could build versus what was effectively what the use was that the applicant is seeking the use variance for. So with that, I'll turn over to our consultant, and then we'll come back for the other factors.
Fundamental question, though. Since you're asking for a use variance, shouldn't you have analysis or at least looked at all other non-conforming uses?
So you look only at the permitted uses. You don't look at specially permitted uses or other uses in the district. You only look at the permitted uses. So our consultant will address that, but I just mentioned those uses that are as of right in the R110 are single-family homes, and then parks, preserves, community gardens, and places of worship.
Because the question is essentially, if there's no use variance, what's the economic reality of the situation? Which is why you can't look at something that's assumed you might get it. You look at what you know you can do tomorrow.
They have to be able to realize a reasonable rate of return. So if you had a commercial property and you were running a cement factory, and then the city made it a single-family residential zoning district, they're effectively constitute taking.
I get that fundamental argument. I just would have imagined, maybe you could make it a hotel or something, another use that is multi-family or multi-resident, usage.
I think some of our factors will go through. It's hard to do this compartmentalized, right? The overall application, the area variance is nice because you can kind of blend it and talk about it in each of its, but because of use variance, you have to consider each of the factors together. If any one factor is, see you later, use variance, right? So this is a little bit more specific, but we will get into that discussion because this board has issued use variances for other multifamily structures, effectively reducing nonconformities on those sites. So there are a number of instances of that. We have submitted those all for your consideration. Eliza Street, Eliza Street, Rombout, yeah, thank you, 123 Rombout, and then of course we'll be submitting to you 5052 South Chestnut, all of which were dealing with existing nonconformities that we believe were went to multifamily uses, right? They reduced that nonconformity. We're the same from an SRO to effectively a multifamily.
Taylor, but you're framing this as though the SRO exists, right? So as it currently stands, it does not. You concede that.
Well, our perspective is.
I understand what your perspective is.
The use has not ceased, no, because it's not been a year.
That is your argument. That
Correct.
Bruce has said was incorrect. We have said is incorrect in your.
Well, Bruce has said we can't reconstruct the building, so they're different. So
Okay.
again, the use does not cease except if it's for more than a year.
That's
To be
your
very
reference.
clear. So the use, for our perspective, has not ceased for more than a year.
I would just like
So
to
then why
point
do you
out-
need a use variance?
Yeah.
So because the building inspector's determination has said that more than 50% of I'm going to let
Sure.
We're pleased to submit these in writing, but I don't want to sort of get into a back and forth before, because we're missing the factors here. We haven't gotten to the financial analysis yet, so I want to stick to that, because this is quite important. So I'll turn back to that.
I just want to point out the examples that you offered up of other non-conforming uses are non-conforming uses that you a minute ago said you're not obliged to look at, because they're not, approved, as approved today by the zoning commission. I like those examples personally.
Well, right, no, 52 South Chestnut was destroyed, it was gone, and then was granted a use variance to rebuild the building and the use. So that one has not been submitted to you yet, because we haven't been able to review the city's files. We submitted on August 1st for that. That will be provided to you there. So that will be directly on point, and I have a closing discussion separate from the factors on the use variance that speaks to that particular use. That was brought to our attention by folks in the city at a later date, so we have to include that in our submission, but that's going to come to you, and I think that will point directly to exactly what you said, the precedent set by this board with respect to use variances and otherwise. But again, I don't want to go, there's a lot of arguments, there's a lot of discussion, and I just want to make sure we address the first factor, which is that the applicant cannot realize a reasonable return provided the lack of return is substantial, demonstrated by, in this instance, competent financial evidence, which is our report. So,
And to that extent, Stowe, I think your question, if I'm understanding, because I want to make sure it's answered, the examples that Mr. Palmer gave had to do with other use variances that were issued.
The non-conforming uses?
Yeah, the requirement to look at permitted uses is for the economic feasibility. So if that's the question you were asking, why is Mr. Palmer mentioning other non-conforming uses when 2 minutes before that we said we can't look at non-conforming? We can't look at non-conforming uses for the sake of determining, why can't you build a hotel there tomorrow and realize your economic return? But Mr. Palmer is mentioning those non-conforming uses for the sake of explaining precedent from this board on prior use variances issued.
I think another important factor that will go into that, and I agree with counsel in that characterization, but one of the other factors, again, we're going to talk about that self-created hardship again, right? In this instance, the applicant purchased, the reason why there is no self-created hardship, notwithstanding that it was burned down, was because the applicant purchased the property with the use so if you were to buy prior applications that were before us this evening, you buy a single-family residential property, it's got a home on it, you then decide you want to build a stadium. It was not a use that was permitted, you knew that, the use variant, you're going to fail the use variance factor right out of the gate. So that's part of that discussion, and that's why the use the applicant is seeking is, again, one that was on the property and now is being reduced to nonconformity. So we're trying to meet a lot of these thresholds and characterizations, but again, it really dials back to just rebuilding the building that was there.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
Hello, my name's Bill Forsheimer from Hudson Property Advisors. I'm a real estate appraiser, and we've been asked to do a feasibility analysis to study the permitted uses under the zoning requirements for this property. And basically what we've done is to compare a single-family use to a multifamily use. This property is located at the intersection of Route 9D, Walcott Avenue, and Teller Avenue, which is Route 52. Also at the junction of Sargent Avenue, which has a moderate degree of traffic as well. We've put some methodology together to determine the feasibility of a single-family house versus a multifamily property by comparing other single-family sales in the city, and we've also looked into single-family rentals as well. We're approaching it from two different angles, from a income approach and from a sale price approach. What we found in the way of sales, we looked at sales that range from 2,000 to 5,000 square feet, generally larger homes than some of the smaller typical homes in the village. And we found that prices ranged from generally from 600,000 to 1.25 million for the larger homes. It came to an average price of 832,000 and a median price of 747,000. We also were provided by the client with a appraisal that had been done in May of '22, which determined the as-is value of the property that was there prior, the multifamily property, had a value of $1.7 million. And when compared to the majority of the homes that we looked at, between $600 and $1.2 million, we naturally ended up with a very large discrepancy between the value of a single-family home and the value of a multifamily home.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Just a real quick question. The date on that appraisal for the 1 million was when?
$1,700,000 was May 16th of '22. It was not an appraisal that we performed. It was an appraisal that was provided us by the owner of the property.
Was that a sales price or an income?
That was a market value of the as-is value at that time, as of that date.
So that was a sales price, a sales value?
No, I
No?
don't think so. I think it was just a appraisal that had been done for the owner. I don't know what the purpose was, whether it was for mortgage lending or just for his personal information on what the value might be.
Okay. Thank you.
It didn't have anything to do with the sale price.
What was the tax assessment value of the property?
Excuse me?
What was the tax assessment value of the property?
That wasn't part of our research.
Assessed at 100%, so.
That wasn't part of our research.
Do you know what it was insured for?
Excuse me?
Do you know what it was insured for? The value of
No.
the insurance? You don't know?
No, we're doing a feasibility study of a single-family versus a multifamily property.
Yeah, but the question we're asking is like, what are the baselines of this 1.7 million, whatever?
Well, we didn't do that appraisal. We're taking it at face value for what it is. We're not reviewing that
So
appraisal.
is your argument that the value that they claim that they had is greater than what you can get on a single-family home? Is that what your argument is?
Basically, yes.
So how is that a ROI on return of reasonable investment?
So again, the report that's before you, we're looking at the economic data, right? We're looking at a reasonable return.
Yeah.
That's, as usual, what's a reasonable return? So before you, we can try and expand on this there were some questions that came out, tax assessed value, insured value, all these things. We can certainly provide this information. We're getting questions. We're trying to answer as many as we can in real time. So with that, I believe we can.
I guess my expectation when I hear you're going to present a financial report on achieving a reasonable return isn't on value comparing a multifamily to a single family, but rather it would be how much did I pay for this? How much can I make on it? What is the delta in my pocket? That's
Right,
what a reasonable
so that's not
return
that's
is.
not precisely, the report itself is just looking at the use that's permitted in the district and the use that was on the property. So what our analysis is showing is that wouldn't be again, this is in the eye of the board and what you all find to be a reasonable return. Is that $5? Is that $1 million?
But you're not actually telling us the actual price. You're then saying he bought the property for this, it was insured for this, right?
These are all
hard numbers.
So just
There's
are all questions you're asking, and we can put this into the analysis. They were not. These aren't. There's no prerequisite to how to complete a financial analysis. We utilizing prior approvals that this board has granted in preparing this analysis for use variances. This is how this was prepared. So we will take these questions and incorporate them into this analysis so they fully spell out the information that you're looking for as a board of totally different persons that were not on that board.
So my questions are more towards, let me say, from an expectation standpoint.
Right.
I would expect the financial analysis is going to show us that if they went with a single-family home, this is what the investment cost is in, this is what they can expect, therefore it's going to be a negative to them, that's a hardship. If there's a positive, then we get into the discussion of what's a reasonable positive, right? But to sit here and tell us a multifamily goes for hearsay X, because there's no detail behind where that 1.7, other than that's what he told us.
Well,
Okay?
that's the appraisal, right? So there,
Well, you didn't say appraisal, you
Yeah.
said that's what they told us.
No, I said that that was a previous appraisal that the owner had done, for
Right, but that building doesn't exist anymore. Now it's just an empty lot.
Right.
well, but that's the
So
test,
if somebody-
that's,
If
setting a
somebody,
basis for-
if somebody built an actual house on there
Right.
and it cost $350,000 to buy it,
Right.
and you could sell it for $1.2 million, therefore they would realize $700,000 or whatever the numbers are. But that's not what you're actually proposing. It's
so
not-
we'll have to, I think what we'll go through when we detail this in the supplemental submission is is what the courts look at when they evaluate what constitutes a reasonable return. Because it's, like you said before, why don't we just do a hotel, right? We can make a lot of money, but that's not permissive. So these are all considerations, but the board has, there is a limit to what the hypotheticals can be contemplated here, because we could be here forever. What if we brought the Space Center here? What if we, what would that be to build it?
We're asking you in what is permitted.
But the question was asked, sorry to interrupt you, but the question that was asked was, if you build it, then you could sell it for this, then how is that not a reasonable rate of return? So that's that question, so these are all things that we're gonna have to analyze in this report to address whether or not, A, they're considerable, so to speak, by the board in the context of what constitutes a reasonable return, and/or, again, for your benefit of trying to make that, weigh weigh whether or not there is a lack of, if I did the test, which isn't, a legal term, multifamily for 16 units versus a single-family home, talk to any developer in the city of Beacon, they're all going to tell you the same thing. I don't need to tell this board that is going to be much more valuable than.
Sure.
And
I
of course,
don't think anyone's disputing that. That's not the question, though, right?
well, it is part of the question. You're looking at whether reasonable return can be provided on competent financial evidence. We're providing the financial evidence to support that the use that was on the property that we're seeking to produce on the property.
But the former use is not relevant.
That's not the case, and we'll put that into our supplemental submission to respond to you and address these questions related to the economic components. So there are other questions specific to the financial analysis that we might be able to incorporate into a written submission?
Is the purchase price on the record?
That wasn't part of our study.
It may be in our March submission. We'll look back and see if it was included in the March submission.
Sure.
And to that extent, absolutely, board members, whatever questions you want to see, I think Mr. Palmer has indicated he's more than willing to supply any information for the next meeting.
I'd like to see a financial analysis of what you paid for the building, what you were experiencing in rents, what you were going to spend on the new, the new building permits that you were getting, what you were expecting, and then you had, a terrible thing happen to you.
Right, and we'll look at the cost of construction for the proposal and, all the things that are.
But that's what we would need to see in order to be able to understand your hardship.
Right, where we are today is we can only build.
I'm a broker.
Understood.
So I would make that up.
Yep. We're going to look at it from a single-family home, and this is what it would cost to do it. We'll look at and we'll look at what we're proposing and what that would cost, and the rate of return based on the investment into building in the property. That's it.
We
Yep.
need to know the real investment.
Exactly.
The real
Yep.
numbers, right? In order to make a
And-
determination.
Absolutely.
You would include the insurance that you received after what the building was insured for?
We could incorporate that, yeah.
Okay.
Everything.
Yeah, that's the.
It might make your best case.
We can include that information for what it's usable for.
To that extent, I think Mr. Forsheimer, if apologizes if I mispronounce your last name.
You got it.
He could continue with the presentation of the feasibility analysis if there are any other questions. That way, Mr. Palmer knows exactly what to come with for next month. For the sake of efficiency, we don't want it to, we want to get all the questions out tonight. So
Right.
to that extent, obviously, Mr. Forsheimer can only speak to
Right, this report
what
was
he knows.
prepared based on prior submissions to your board, so that's how it was done, based on prior submissions. So we hear your comments, so we'll incorporate those so that they're addressed. Anything else in your report?
Well, basically, you know, what we found was that, yes, a single-family home is not going to be worth as much as a multifamily home, which is very obvious. We also looked at it from a rental point of view. The rents on single-family homes, they range from $2,000 up to over $4,000 these days. A single-family home, then, even if it rented out at top dollar, at $4,000 a month, say, won't come close to the income that was produced by a multifamily property, which was in the neighborhood of, bear with me, previously over $20,000 per month income from the existing building, the prior building, and the other building that was going to be built, the proposed building, would produce an estimated $17,550 a month, compared to the $4,000 that a single-family home would rent for. That also shows the lack of viability of a single-family home on this site.
Something just struck me as unusual. The appraisal report says that the income would be $20,333 per month. That's the appraisal report, I understand.
That was from that prior appraisal report that was
Right.
done in '22.
And then after that, it's saying after the renovation with the 9 units, the income would be $17,550.
Correct, that's the owner's estimate.
So he was willing to take $3,000 a month cut and pay to go down to 9 units?
Well, the argument would be, what, you know, what's the net? That's the gross,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So what is the, you know, what's the cost to maintain 16 versus 9? As a landlord myself, that, you know, something to be considered. So,
Okay.
you know, I don't think that's,
Yeah, I just,
yeah.
it's.
No, I
an
understand
odd-
it's weird, right? But I could see why.
And the applicant was proposing substantial improvements. This was to improve the facilities, to put, you know, kitchenettes and bathrooms in the units. So it was taking what is a consistent SRO use, where it's shared kitchen, you know, shared bathrooms, and it was trying to improve those.
So is your definition or criteria for reasonable something that's exactly or close to comparable to the multi-use? Or is your definition of reasonable something that's positive and not negative in his pocket?
Yeah, I mean, I
I'm
think it's
asking for your opinion.
my opinion.
Yeah, both of you.
But again, I think I'll defer that into a written response, because I have to stay within the confine. My opinion is just that of my opinion. It's not what's the legal threshold that is considered for the reasonable return. So my opinion is, yes, it's
And what
clear
about the
that he would not
gentleman
make a reasonable return on a single-family home over building a multifamily
What about
structure.
the gentleman
Based on my
who's the
experience with other
financial
development in the city of Beacon, multifamily is much more valuable, and there's.
Not arguing that at all.
Right.
But the gentleman who's the financial expert here, how do you define reasonable? Is it comparable to what it was, or is it a positive in the cash flow in the individual's pocket?
I'm not sure I understand. I think that in terms of real estate, you're looking at the highest and best use to maximize the profit of a property.
No, I'm just saying, if they were putting hypothetically $10,000 profit in their pocket a month before, and now they're putting in $6,000 with a single-family home, or $2,000, is that still not reasonable in your opinion?
My opinion has nothing to do with it, really.
Okay. Well, I guess you said it earlier, depends on the definition of how we see reasonable.
Yeah, and it also depends on how much you paid to buy the property.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, reasonable rate of, it's based on the application, so that's all relevant, but at the same time, we're looking at the uses that are permitted on the property. So if the chairman decided to buy this property today and came in with an application,
So you're gonna come back with details comparing a single-family home
yes.
on, hey, this way, this is what it cost us, this
Correct.
is what we could make, single-family home, this is what it cost us, what we can make, and we can look
One
at
thing
that
the board
now.
needs to consider in this application that's particularly important is that I couldn't go buy this property today and come to you for a use variance for the application that's before you. I couldn't, because I, buying that property, would only be permitted, based on the current set of circumstances, based on these determinations and all the other things we disagree with, and let's just use a different property. I want to go buy another single-family residence, the one that was on the applications earlier tonight. I can only buy that house to build a house there. I can't come to you for a use variance for a multifamily unit there. You'll deny me immediately because I have no self-created hardship.
Well, you could.
I could, you would deny me because I failed the test of a non-self-created hardship. This application is particularly unique, very specialized, because there is no self-created hardship. The applicant bought the property with multifamily use and is before you trying to quite literally rebuild the thing that was there for 100 years. So we're talking about the financial analysis. We're going to get you that information, but that is important to know with this application. This isn't just an ask because we're trying to, get some better benefit. We're just trying to get a reasonable rate of return on a property that he invested in, that had the right to use the.
So we have to define what reasonable.
Will you concede that will you concede that reasonable could be somewhere in between a single-family home and what was permitted?
I would, absolutely. So if we came to you seeking a use variance for 20 units, and the board said, no, the minimum relief necessary to make a reasonable return is, we're proposing 9, that's the minimum relief necessary to have a reasonable rate of return? Absolutely. But
it might be 4.
So if the board makes a determination that the minimum relief necessary to achieve a reasonable return is 4, then that would be the case. So yes.
I think what we need is more information from our attorney and from your submission on how reasonable has been determined and is determined by case law, right? Before we could even consider, anything more on this factor.
Well, we would determine what was reasonable, right? Based on the information that we get. That's our function, right?
Sure, but I think what would speak to, right, there's law that's precedent, right? And so our council will advise how the board should determine reasonability, and then we'll apply that law to the facts, and then make a determination on what is reasonable.
Correct, but as the chairman mentioned, if the minimum, it's still the same as, in that regard, it's the minimum relief to make an economically viable return, reasonable return. So if that's 9 units, if that's 8 units, that's where our position is based on the submissions and the material and the owner's investment and the that's all why it's 9 units. Like, they did that math. I think the question was asked, like, why would you reduce, right, from 16 to 9? If you're going to lose, it's all part of the formula of what's necessary to build it out, manage it. It's not you're going to make this money tomorrow. It's over a period of time.
Can you also include when the property was purchased?
Yes. Yep.
And another factor that is sort of the elephant in the room for me anyway, is you don't have to build the old building that you had proposed, right? It's gone.
We're
not talking about necessarily
correct.
requiring it. You just rebuild the building.
You're absolutely correct, Mr. Member Wood. It's in this instance we had a building permit to build the thing. So we're trying to keep it. We're trying to say that what was there is all we're trying to rebuild. That's not going to affect, because there's all these other standards, right? So we're trying to make this as straightforward as possible. Just quite literally trying to rebuild the thing that we had a permit to do. So you're absolutely right. It doesn't need to be, and that's that same balancing, right, of whether or not if it's the least. So if it was 5 units, but you're right, it doesn't have to be, but this is being submitted that way because it does align with all of the other characterizations. But
And to that extent, Taylor, if you don't mind, on Exhibit B, page 2 and 3 of the July submission, that was one of the use variances, it lists some of the things that courts consider. I think probably if you could just hit those in a bulleted list, some of that information, just for, what they consider dollars and cents and comparison and things like that, in addition to whatever else.
I think based on tonight, we have work to do to put into that report, so it meets, it redresses how you all need to be able to make that determination, and ultimately relies too on what, as I think the chairman mentioned and council's mentioned, what the standard is and how courts consider that threshold. So that we're not, coming up with the Taylor hypothetical of the building the space station on the property versus a house. So we'll do that. If the board sees fit, I'll move on to the hardship standard.
Can I mention one other thing?
Yep, good.
One other point I didn't get to make. When figuring a single-family home on this site, you have the high traffic from Route 52, from Route 9D, little bit from Sargent Avenue, that's going to greatly diminish the value and marketability of a single-family home. Whereas it's not going to diminish the value of a multifamily unit, which is a sort of different animal and appeals to a different sort of tenant or buyer.
I could argue that.
Well, it's, you've got external obsolescence from two main roads. Single-family home, typically going to be purchased by a family with children. You're going to not have the appeal and marketability that a home on a less traveled area would have.
The units by themselves are smaller, will not lend themselves to more than, families.
Looking at studio and single,
Right.
Yeah, but
one-bedroom apartments.
What I'm saying is I could argue is that, you could probably build quite a nice home there and sell it for quite a bit of money right now in this town.
Well, right now in this current market, you could probably sell anything anywhere on a main road.
Exactly.
The marketability
So,
of
that's
the
why I
main
was
road
just saying
isn't
that-
affected in
Yeah, of
this
course.
type of market. However, in a down market, it's going to be severely affected.
Yeah, but it's not a down market.
All right, so I'm going to shift to the hardship component. So part of the second of the four factors that we're going to talk about here concerns, thank you, appreciate it, whether this is unique and does not apply to a substantial portion of the district and neighborhood. So that's the current factor is the hardship is unique and does not apply to a substantial portion of the neighborhood. So as we noted in our March and June letters, the hardship is very unique. This is because of course, the circumstances before you. We don't submit that people will do this intentionally, but this was an intentional act caused by another. So I think what's even more unique is the applicant had a building permit to build out the proposal. You don't really see this fact pattern often, and hope to not see it again. So we don't believe that it will be replicated elsewhere. As detailed in our other submissions, the use existed since 1965, so preceded the city's enactment of zoning. The shift in the character of the area, of course, the development of the city's housing authority and other uses in the area certainly changed that area. But again, the uniqueness does not require that the property that's subject of use variance be the only property that suffers from this particular hardship. I mean, again, there is a 916 Walcott in proximity, but nevertheless, this is a very, in our perspective, very unique hardship.
Taylor, would you read that as two different clauses? The hardship is unique, separate from, does not apply to a substantial portion of the district and neighborhood?
It's saying and, so the hardship is unique and,
Right,
not
so
or.
your contention is the hardship is unique, obviously. That's the argument you have to make.
Right.
You're going to cite precedent for other unique hardships that this board granted variances for?
Correct.
How many?
Right now, we've submitted two, so we'll have a third.
In however long, okay.
Right, but again, it's this district or neighborhood, so those are in separate districts, and
So you don't think that, so you think it is together? You don't think that the,
I can reasonably and definitively say, from our perspective, that this does not apply to a substantial portion, that the relief the applicant is seeking and the application, the hardship is unique and does not apply. So the hardship that we're faced with, the fact that a building was burned down on the site, is not something that is likely seen often or with regularity in the community, especially in particular in this instance, multifamily use of this type. So I think it's particularly unique and does not apply to a substantial portion of the district or neighborhood. But it isn't, you're correct, it is an and. The next factor in the test is that it will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. Of course, this use has been there since at least 1965, again, well before that. And there are other multifamily buildings, and there's also a existing boarding house multifamily use at 916 Walcott directly across the street. We've mentioned in our submissions the 895 Walcott, Forrestal Heights, along Creek Drive in the immediate vicinity of the property. And then we included an illustration in our submission that highlighted other development in the area, of course, the city's housing authority and otherwise.
how are you defining neighborhood?
I guess I don't define neighborhood, but it's effectively, it could be the whole city, but in this particular neighborhood, it is immediate. If you're saying neighborhood, you could say directly across the street from the same use. the hardship, the next question, or
Well,
the,
what you're
oh, sorry.
saying, no alterations to the essential character of the neighborhood when it was in operation, when it was in existence, when it was, but compared to now that it's not,
Yeah, that's my question.
right? So if you apply that criteria to now that it's not in existence, would there be an alteration to the essential character of the neighborhood, is how I would read that. Is that how you would read it?
So I would read it as, the question is, the variance will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. So our perspective is, the character of the neighborhood has been well established. This use has been there, well, for the most part, well before the single-family residences or other areas, cul-de-sacs that have been developed in this area, right? Including Beacons Housing Authority and other development in this particular neighborhood and area. So it is effectively part of the essential character of that neighborhood. You'll hear probably public comments tonight about the neighborhood and what it has been. The applicant before you is seeking to reduce that nonconformity, right, to effectively bring it more in conformance to what is otherwise permissive. So if anything, it would be we're suggesting a betterment, but nothing prohibits someone from building a building the exact same size as was on that property. So our perspective is that it's not altering the essential character of the neighborhood because it's been a part of that neighborhood for the last century.
All right, but I guess my comment is, without finalizing an opinion, is it was part of the neighborhood, it is no longer part of the neighborhood.
Correct, which is the only reason why we could be before you this evening, because it was...
So introducing it, would it alter the neighborhood as it is today?
So again, the only reason why we're before you is because of the circumstances of it being destroyed. The issue that's presented therefore is whether that use that was destroyed, that's trying to be rebuilt in kind, would affect the character. And I think we've included case law to the effect in our submissions, but we can provide further elaboration on the essential character aspect of it, especially when it's been part of the character of that community for a century. And effectively, it's the same use directly across the street. So I think it's consistent, even if you were to build it today, you're saying, is it consistent with the uses in the area? It is across the street, the same use.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The last consideration before turning it over to the public or to the board for other questions is whether or not the hardship has been self-created. That's a similar factor to your area variance test. And of course, in this instance is not self-created. The building was burned down by a tenant. The applicant purchased it with the legal existing nonconformity on the property. So ultimately, that's our submission on that factor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I will open it up to public comment.
Can I just ask him
of course,
one
yeah.
question?
Sure.
In all your submissions, you refer to this as SRO.
Mm-hmm.
However, some of them, at least two of the apartments, it's very hard to read the schematics, are very small. The others are really kind of like junior one-bedrooms in the city.
Efficiencies.
Is there a particular reason you keep inserting SRO as opposed to apartment or efficiency?
We can call it, and I mean, it's an excellent question. The boarding house or SROs, those uses are not permitted in city code if you were to build one today, right? So effectively, you know, there are multifamily uses, there are others. So I think there was a comment about efficiency units. They'd have any unit built today would have to meet the state building code requirement as an efficiency unit. So single room occupancy typically had a connotation with a shared kitchen or a shared bathroom. These are more of the efficiency where they have a kitchenette and they have a bathroom.
But all your applications refer to this at different spots as an SRO going forward.
I think we've been moving away from that characterization, just referring to it as multifamily, because again, it's how the state building code will refer to it. But the board ultimately has, the use we're seeking is that multifamily use. I know Bruce has an opinion one way or the other on calling it SRO or multifamily. Yeah, sorry, Bruce. But no, Bruce, I didn't mean to put you on that.
Basically, so that the legal definition in the zoning code for these type of residences are SROs. That's how it's been referred to for years, because they were single-room occupancies. Some of them did have their own kitchens and bathrooms, but most of the units used a common bathroom and a common kitchen.
Right.
And it was a shared unit. So it was always referred, again, as in the zoning code, it's specifically referred to as an SRO. And that's, I believe, the use that they're looking to continue. The only thing within the building code was an efficiency unit. So when they were reducing the number of units prior to the fire, actually, prior to the fire, the work was started without a building permit. So we need to, that really needed to be clear, because the owner decided to do all the renovations without a permit. He just went and started tearing the place apart, and one of the deputy building inspectors caught him because he was out there for an inspection, once we got a complaint from the health department. So lo and behold, the place was pretty much wide open because of the demolition that had already taken place, which, ultimately, when the fire was lit, it basically went through the building much quicker than if it was totally finished off as all finished spaces. But the SRO, they were still going to have to maintain that, because on the books, it was always, for the history, anything from 1965 going forward, the city has always identified that as an SRO.
So to maintain the use,
So
they would have to say it was an
As
SRO.
an SRO.
But the units would have to be built to New York
They
State
have to
building
be
code
built
standards.
to an efficiency apartment standard that's in the building code, which
Okay.
dictates some minimum sizes and requirements.
Right, the existing units were below that and could remain, but if they're to be improved, they would have to meet efficiency units of the 2020, whatever the current
So
building
Bruce,
fire code.
what would be, what would be the distinction between, or the minimum, I guess? How, yeah.
There is none. The use, from a multifamily perspective, the units have to be built under current building and fire code. So
But
whether,
why can't we just call it an apartment?
correct, whether you call it SRO
Well,
or.
the reason
multi-
they have to call it an SRL, because if they didn't prior to the fire, they would lose
That's under,
the
right,
use.
that's if the interpretation was overturned and we proceeded as a building permit, that's how it's characterized. But again, it still has to meet state building code. They're different issues, that use and what they can be constructed to.
And to that extent, and Bruce, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, the schedule of use regulations just provides multifamily dwelling, so it's almost like potato kind of deal. The application is for a multifamily. When the building permit is before Bruce and the plans are before Bruce, Bruce will make sure everything is up to code for whatever it's supposed to be, but right now, yes, the submissions I've also noticed say SRO, but in my head, it's multifamily use, because that's a use that, according to the schedule of use regulations, is not permitted in the district, so that's the use variation.
So, yeah, and I believe it would be, it's up to the board to whether this is a continuing use. And if it's a continuing use, it would be the same use as what was in the past going forward, and not some type of recreation into something different, like creating this into 1 or 2 bedroom units.
Right.
Where it might actually intensify the use on the property.
Right.
That would have to be, if it was to go that direction, that would have to be analyzed.
But
to
didn't our decision last time say that we weren't going to continue the use? It's a new day?
Well, I think, Bruce, your point is, if, there's a lot of things here. If, hypothetically speaking, a use variance was approved, the determination at that point is, okay, is the use that is now permissible for this particular property going to be the prior building permit, which was to renovate the old building, or would it be for, okay, fine, it's a multifamily, but I don't want that.
Yeah, we'll need a new building permit,
Yeah.
period, because it's it would be a full reconstruction. They were just doing renovation work. So the building itself was being retrofitted, but it would require
Yeah.
a submission of a new building permit. But once a use is determined permissive by this board, as distinct from what it was as an existing nonconformity, that use runs with the land, right? That's the distinction. So it's the building would effectively be approved as is proposed.
As SRO or as,
Right.
however you guys decide the multifamily, if you permit multifamily, what it should look like. Is it 9 apartments and whatever standards that comes with? Is it 9 efficiency units, or is it a mixture of the two? The reason SRO has been used, I think, was just a matter of convenience because that's what it was.
Yeah, I'd like clear definitions of what it is we're approving, if we should approve it.
Yeah.
You had a building permit,
Mm-hmm.
right? That did not require a variance. You didn't come before this board.
Correct. They're efficient. We were reducing.
Because you were reducing the nonconformity.
And the buildings were being
Therefore,
correct.
you don't need a variance.
Right, we were reducing the number of units, and right, all that was going into them were bathroom, kitchenettes, and bathrooms. That was it. There was no, and I guess maybe sprinklers. I don't.
Well, yes, they will need under the building code.
Right.
Under new construction, it would need sprinklers, but that's, it's just an additional cost that they have to spend if they want to go forward, or if it goes forward. Yeah, but again, it's just, my take on it is, again, it's, with what was upheld was they can't rebuild because, the non-conforming use and the building being destroyed. If you were allowing them to go forward, it would still be a continuation of that existing use, unless they're making application otherwise.
It's an SRO it is a multifamily use. It's a single room occupancy with kitchenette, to be clear, single room occupancy, kitchenette, and that meets New York State's building and fire code of the current.
As an efficiency apartment.
As an efficiency apartment. That's what's prescribed. I appreciate the request for clarity, but that's the nature of what's being sought.
Okay. It is 9:23. I'm going to just call for a 5-minute adjournment for a bathroom break for myself. Thanks. So now it is 9:30, and we will open it to public comment. If you would please step to the podium, state your name and address for the record. And Montos, if you could be the timekeeper and attempt to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less.
And please make sure you speak into the microphone as well, just so that it's clear for the record and for everyone to hear in the room.
Hello.
Hi, gang. Hi, thanks for having me speak. My name's Lisa Wagner. I'm at 66 Sargent Avenue.
Thank you.
My kind of takeaway from this evening of what I've been hearing, and I did miss the last meeting, but, we're talking, I'm hearing a lot about, financial hardship and investment strategy, costs, all of that stuff. Finance degree gives me a little bit of an edge of understanding what's going on, but with any type of investment, an investment in property especially, there's like a lot of inherent risk, just like running the stock market or having an investment. You have the opportunity for big return. You have the opportunity for loss. God only knows the war in Croatia cost me 80 grand. But if I were going to buy a multi-property and use it as an investment, I would really want to know what my worst case scenarios would be. Like, wow, if my property burned down, I can only build a single family residence. Would this be worthwhile for me? Would I incur a lot of legal costs, et cetera, to fight and try and, recoup my losses? Would my insurance compensation with the possible sale of the property be something that would give me restitution in my losses? I'd check that out first, but that's just me. I know there's a big debate about what this property should become. And we talked, spoke of properties in the neighborhood, the property across the street, the other SRO, et cetera, that's been there. My question again would hearken to, if that burned down, what does that become? Is that in the same zoning that 925 is in? Would that revert to a single-family home as well? Because we're in the same zoning district, and maybe the reason we established those zonings and the type of properties that we wanted in those areas is because we wanted to change the footprint of the neighborhood and maybe not have multifamily residences of that nature in the neighborhood that was evolving and growing over the last 60 years there. Okay? So, again, just because what was there once before does not mean it has to be what was there today. That is the hence definition of change and evolution in a town or a neighborhood. And as far as financial loss and hardship, I feel it too with the economy, and I understand that that may be happening here as well, but that's inherent in the risk of an investment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Teresa Kraft. Truthfully, the allowable green space park on this property mentioned earlier tonight sounds welcoming. Listening to tonight's submission, I am still opposed to granting an area variance by way of any loophole to permit reconstruction, and I am also opposed to the second alternative, issuing a use variance, or the second loophole presented from section 223-17C, to permit a multifamily or an SRO building in the single-family resident zone neighborhood. I do not believe the applicant should be allowed to set the building standards in the city when our own local laws prohibit such multifamily or SRO buildings to be built after the single-family zoning change, regardless of how the original building met its demise. Tonight, we heard the owner's renovations without a required building permit ultimately helped accelerate the fire and the total loss of the original building. The applicant should not be allowed to rebuild and continue to have a non-conforming use building disguised as a new build. This parcel is a freestanding parcel, and it should not be based on other non-conforming buildings in the surrounding neighborhood. Unfortunately, the applicant's purchase was iffy from the get-go and should not become the financial hardship of all residents of Beacon with the discussion of a potential lawsuit, nor should its surrounding neighbors be denied their quality of life existence. If you are to approve this project based on this long-winded argument and interpretation based on their own unreasonable request, Beacon might as well not have a building inspector, no city building codes, and no ZBA. Thank you. Vote no.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
My name is Michal Mart, Ward 3. I'm not going to refer to the area variance because it doesn't sound like it's a valid option on the table at this time, but in terms of the use variance, I really appreciated the board's questions about the financial analysis, and I would like to hear the answers. I do know that it was bought for $650,000, so if they got $1.7 million for the insurance, they already made like a nice chunk of change without doing anything. And in terms of the consideration of the essential character of the neighborhood, I do agree with members of the board that it should be compared to what is there now, not what was there before the fire, and therefore I think that it will change it and alter the essential character of the neighborhood. And just additionally, I disagree that the Beacon Housing Authority is in that neighborhood. It's a different neighborhood. Yes, it's a 9D, but this is a single-family neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is David Simon, Beacon resident here. So it is my belief that the health and safety of the community should always be first and foremost, which is why I'm proposing a requirement for a sidewalk and a crosswalk to be placed in front of 925 Walcott. So a sidewalk in front of the house or that property to the George Washington statue island. I often take walks down Teller Avenue with my dog and baby to Beacon daily, and the existing crosswalk is incredibly unsafe. With the curve in 9D going west, that's like not only is it a fast-moving traffic road, but it's hard to see cars coming. So I'm large how dangerous it is, and with Sargent Avenue being a fairly busy road as well, going to the school and the district office and the condos and Madame Brett, I feel like it just kind of doesn't really, it just doesn't make sense for a road like that to not have a safe place to cross. Because currently, the safest place that you have to cross would be down a ways to Tironda Avenue where the traffic light is, and even during school hours, you have they have a crosswalk guard kind of right in front of the Stag, the Elks Club, and also. So I'm proposing a crosswalk to the island, and with a pedestrian crossing, yield to pedestrian sign with maybe an amber blinking light so people driving fast can see it, and also as the financial consultant pointed out that this property is surrounded by high traffic streets, and so it would be a public service and behoove the applicant to build a sidewalk for the safety of these potential family residents, multifamily residents, regardless. Or if it does end up being a single family home, it still is for the health and safety of the neighborhood. Sorry. Yeah, not the best public speaker.
Thank you for speaking. Bruce, just for clarification, what is the responsibility of an owner as far as the installation of sidewalks? Versus the city?
Okay. Sidewalks, I believe only if the sidewalk is actually there, the owner is responsible for maintaining them. I don't believe that there's a requirement to have them put them in.
So does the city determine if a sidewalk will exist, but then the resident must maintain the sidewalk?
Yeah, so if there is an actual sidewalk there is a requirement on the books that it must be maintained by the property owner.
If there is not a sidewalk, can an owner install a sidewalk? Or
if the owner installs a sidewalk, then they would have to maintain that going forward.
Can they do that by right?
To install a sidewalk?
Yes.
Sure. They would be able to do that.
Okay. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Norma Manyweather. I live at 923 Walcott Avenue, right next to the building that was burned down. And that building needs to be a single-family home. We do not need a multiplex there. That is not the spot for a multiplex. We need a single family or a garden, either or. But a multiplex, for anyone to stand up here and say that a single family home would bring more traffic than a multiplex, that's not very smart, because anyone would know better than that. You're talking about maybe extra 30, 40 cars in comparison to maybe 2 more cars, mom, pops, and maybe a few kids around the house. We need to take into consideration the safety, the noise, the traffic, and take into consideration with our fire department, police department, and our ambulance service. Prior to that building burning down, almost every other day or every weekend, there was a fight. The ambulance was there, the fire department was there, the police department was there. Maybe I need to collect all that stuff and bring it into you guys. But a multiplex is only gonna make it worse. It is not gonna make it any better for myself, my husband, and the rest of the community. It's gonna make it worse. And we do not need an extra 30, 40 cars in that little space. We don't need it. And I would appreciate it if they not come up here and say that a multiplex would be better than a single family, and it would be more traffic with a single family, because it's not true. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Meg Oaks, 913 Walcott. I couldn't make a lot of sense out of the discussion about the area variance, but I wanted to comment on the use variance, that I really feel that definitely going from what it's now, the single family, to multifamily will be detrimental to the neighborhood. It's a pretty neighborhood. There's a lot of pretty homes. A lot of people, tourists come and drive through there. And I just think that I put so much weight. If a variance were granted, it would be forever. It would be permanent, and it would change the whole neighborhood. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Leslie Deshler-Canasi. I'm at 51 South Chestnut in Ward 2. I wrote it down. I'm a parent of 2 middle school age children who attended Sargent Elementary K through 5th. Our children, along with many others, bike and walk to school, and we're very familiar with the traffic and the flow at the intersection of Walcott and Sargent. The site of 925 Walcott Avenue. Like many others, we have participated in school and neighborhood area cleanup days and all sorts of other community-based activities that take place in the site in question. We walk and drive by this corner daily, that is to say, we know it well. It is my hope the conversations in the City of Beacon will work to improve safety and mobility for existing residents, including school-age children. Instead, we're here using our limited time and resources to consider privileging more density without existing infrastructure to support the growth, while contributing to the increasing tensions in a community that is struggling to pay rising property taxes and insurance costs. As this intersection is already problematic, the addition of a multi-use building, cars, and other would be a significant disruption to the neighborhood, adding to numerous challenges related to congestion, traffic, and safety. A multi-use building of this kind would create undesirable changes that would, in fact, negatively impact the character of the neighborhood without solving any real issues that we have in Beacon. I want to be clear, like hundreds of other residents who have spoken up, I am not opposed to growth and change, but when growth happens, and it's set by folks without direct ties or knowledge of the character of the community or exists only in support of investment or investors, we must say no. And finally, in closing, there is no valid justification for requesting or granting a variance for a multi-unit structure at 925 Walcott Avenue. The zoning law is clear and straightforward. The prior non-conforming exemption has expired. So I wrote this last time when we were unable to share. With the removal of the structure and the permitted use no longer exists. Please vote no to following our codes and maintain and preserve a single-family zoning in support of the many residents who have shared their concerns, which are valuable and valid. I ask the Zoning Appeals Board to stand by the integrity of our zoning and deny the developer's appeal and zoning variance request for 925 Walcott. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Brittany Mustakis. I'm at 80 Sargent Avenue.
You speak into the
Can
mic.
you hear me okay? Okay, that's better.
Thank you.
All right. I have a lot of things written down, but I just want to say a lot of it has already been discussed. Sporting House has been a long time general nuisance to the neighborhood that we've endured for, and not protested, for the reason it would provide people with lower income housing. The other compared buildings of non-conforming use in this area have lower rents, and they also have sidewalks, adequate parking. The other examples, apart from Forestal Heights, are also historic buildings, as this one was, that have been allowed to continue non-conforming use and would be upheld to the same laws if destroyed. The only thing I wanted to say otherwise is just about the safety of the neighborhood. The sidewalks are lacking, but also the traffic, the whole intersection. So even if the sidewalks were added, like just the crossings, everything would be still an issue. Also, I just wanted to say the difficulty was not self-created, but this property owner willingly took a risk in buying this property, knowing that the building and use were non-conforming. And if the building was destroyed, they would lose that right. In a city where we can't agree on anything, we all agree that this apartment building should not be in this property. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's everyone. All right. Just want to acknowledge some additional written correspondence from James Case Leal, Stephen and Meg Oakes, and Gregory Cole resubmitted his letter of 6/21/23. And then we just have some additional housekeeping items to take care of. One would be the tolling agreement. And
Yeah.
George, do you want to just introduce that?
Yeah, so as part of, obviously this is a three-prong process, let's call it. We had the interpretation, we have the potential area variance and the potential use variance. There's a potential agreement, tolling agreement, basically pushing back the date to commence an appeal with the Supreme Court of the interpretation issue. There's no legal downside to this. It's currently proposed under this agreement to be, I believe, September 25th, 2023. So I'm pushing it out about a month. There's no legal downside to this. It's really a housekeeping issue in as much as if, hypothetically speaking, there were multiple appeals of decisions made by the board, it wouldn't make sense for the board or for anyone to have to deal with three separate things, right? So the idea is have the tolling agreement, so if also the use variance is granted or an area variance is granted or whatever the case is, then there wouldn't be a lawsuit because the applicant has gotten what they were seeking. So the tolling agreement, it's been provided to the board. It's 3 pages, one of which is a signature page. But what it essentially does, long story short, is on page 2, paragraph 1, the date by which the owner must file any petition pursuant to Article 78 is hereby extended through and including September 25th, 2023. That is the proposal. So to that extent, again, no legal downside. If you would, I would ask that if the board would like to, make a motion to authorize the city to enter into the tolling agreement.
George, just for some clarification, is there a reason, so normally, if this was not filed, they would have until August 20th, is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
And is there a reason why September 25th was picked rather than, I know there was some discussion, I believe there was some discussion, that we would hold this open until our, whatever final act we made was determined. Is there a reason why there's a date certain rather than?
I think the date certain was an initial estimation of probably when you would
We contemplated the board may have acted this evening,
Yeah.
in which case that would have set the 30 days in motion. So in all likelihood, we would, if the board does not have all of its materials and is not making a decision next month, it will likely be amended to go out until October. I think the idea was to make, it was envisioned that the board might be in position tonight to make determinations, in which case it would effectively have been about 30 days.
Yeah, so, I would just offer, just to amend this to say 30 days after the board makes its last action on this application. Any objection to that? Anyone? Thoughts, comments?
We certainly don't have an objection. It will certainly save an amendment.
It would save the amendment. Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, I don't see an issue with that. I will say that I was away on vacation when this was negotiated.
Yeah, I can
so-
speak directly to the
Yeah.
issue, and speaking with council's counsel, Judge Siebert, in discussing it, was so that if the issues were decided, if you decided on the area variance, but then spent another 6 months proceeding, that the applicant it wouldn't preclude the applicant from appealing those decisions, like, say, you know what, we're not going to wait, file the lawsuit. So I think that was the only
Yeah,
true
so-
deliberation about why
And that wouldn't.
there was a date.
If we edited it to that language, you could still file whenever, you know.
Correct.
Right, okay.
Yeah,
So,
to that extent, to Taylor's point, yeah, it is in theory if Taylor comes back 12 more times, or it keeps getting adjourned for whatever reason, then the window to start that proceeding, both for the applicant and for the city to be aware of it, can be extended a year, which I think is not necessarily something that benefits one party more than the other, but the lack of certainty to that extent is something.
Yeah, I
that
think we're accepting of leaving it for the September, and if there's a clause that just says that it may be, you know, that council for the city can agree to extend this, you know, up to 30 days or something like that, where it just allows to, you know, just some flexibility that won't have to require a full plethora of signatures on a document that we sort of all agree that really should be 30 days from whenever the board decides the area and use variance component.
yeah,
It's something we can certainly discuss offline. But unfortunately, we do need to have this signed in the next few days.
Sure.
Yeah, given that it's August 15th. So, yeah, we could discuss it offline, amending that language, and if that, you know, you could always.
Maybe something to the effect of September, you know, with extendability, and/or some alternative that approves.
Yeah, so, all right, so I'll ask for a motion to approve this, the authorization for the city to enter this agreement for an extension through at least September 25th, with the possibility of amending language with the discussion between council, and the chair. Can I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion
Elaine?
by
Is it
Elaine,
Elaine,
yes.
okay.
Can I have a second? Second. Here, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right.
And then the other thing.
Yes.
As we know, one of the big talking points tonight was the financial, you know, the feasibility, the reasonable return. If the board deems it prudent to hire a consultant to analyze the report and sort of take whatever Mr. Palmer presents at the next meeting or any subsequent meeting to aid in that decision, that is something that is not unheard of. Plenty of boards do that. To that extent, if the board feels that is the way to go forward, you would also need a motion to authorize the entry of into an agreement with the consultant for this purpose on this application.
Sure. Say anything? Right, okay.
Typical, yep.
Yep, all right, so can I have a motion for that authorization, please?
Motion to enter into agreement with the financial consultant?
We have a motion from Elaine. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second by Montos. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nay?
Nay.
Nay from Judy. All
Can I,
right.
can I object? Can I even object to that? To me, but I was like, I don't think I can object to that.
I mean, you know, you could.
I object.
Can I have a motion to adjourn the public hearing on agenda item number 1? Motion. Motion from Monto, second from Judy. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And then one housekeeping item that I did not do at the beginning of the
If I
meeting.
may, Mr. Chairman, just the date certain.
Sorry.
Is
What was that?
September, the date certain for the adjournment is September,
For the tolling agreement?
nope, for for the next hearing.
Meeting.
Oh, sorry.
public, yep.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Should be the 19th, but I don't know if we have any holidays. Okay, so next meeting will be September 19th. There may or may not be a training session from George at the beginning of the meeting. The meeting will start no later than 7:30. Housekeeping item, last housekeeping item, has everyone reviewed the minutes from the previous meeting?
Yes.
Are there any alterations, edits, comments?
No.
Can I have a motion to accept the minutes from the July meeting of the zoning board?
Motion to accept.
Motion from Montes, can I have a second?
Second.
Second. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Motion from Judy, can I have a second?
Second.
Second by Montes, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
Aye. You say aye instead of aye?
Sure.
That was the second, I thought we weren't gonna get a second to adjourn the